Our story begins with a man who spent 3 years fishing without a single catch, losing his house, his car, and $1 million in savings while his wife left him for someone else. His parents had even cut ties with him, and only then did he realize the harsh truth. A life of fishing can lead to a lifetime of ruin. Just as he was ready to give up fishing and return to a normal life, something unexpected happened. He became bound to a fishing system. The system offered him 3 distinct career paths. The first was to become a professional competitive angler. He could become a master of the tournament circuit, or the second option, open his own fishery and become a commercial pond owner. The third was to be a lonely, free-spirited angler, considering that becoming a master would take far too long. And since no sane person would choose to be a lonely wanderer, he decisively chose to become a commercial pond owner. Being a pond owner wouldn't just grant him system rewards, it would allow him to profit from the 300 million anglers across the country. The system congratulated him on his choice and issued his first task. He needed to acquire a fishing ground of his very own. Only then could he unlock his beginner's reward. Hearing this requirement, he immediately knit his brows in thought. After 3 years of fishing had already ruined his life, he suddenly remembered the Yulong village reservoir back in his rural hometown. It seemed no one had leased it yet, so he immediately drove to Yulong village. However, the sight of the reservoir left him utterly speechless. What was once a 1,000-acre reservoir had dried up so much that barely 3 or 4 acres of water remained. It looked as desolate as a wild puddle, though to be fair, the surrounding mountains and scenery weren't half bad. He figured it might still work as a commercial pond, so he immediately called village chief Liu to discuss the lease. But Chief Liu warned him that the reservoir leaked constantly. He was honest enough to say that it might dry up completely any day now, and he strongly advised against using it for fish farming. Just as he was about to give up, the system's voice rang out again. It suggested that he should indeed use the Yulong village reservoir as his base of operations, noting that the system's upgrade functions could fix the leaks and other damages. Hearing this, he called Chief Liu back and, biting the bullet, signed a 10-year lease for the reservoir right then and there. Village Chief Liu, seeing Li Mu's apparent sincerity, even kindly waived the rent for the very first year of the lease. Once the contract was signed, the system's voice chimed in immediately, congratulating him on successfully owning his own fishing facility. At that moment, the water area measured exactly 2.88 acres, and we see that the reservoir currently contained no fish at all. When asked if he wanted to open the beginner's gift pack, he immediately confirmed, and the rewards were granted. The system provided whitebait, yellow skin, and gobies, and just like that, the fry were released into the pond. Then came the upgrade task. He had to invite anglers to fish at a rate of 30 yuan per hour. They were to fish at the Yulong village reservoir, with a minimum time requirement of 5 hours per session. As long as one person paid and started fishing, he would earn a single opportunity to upgrade the facility. After hearing the rewards and the task, he felt like he was about to lose his mind. After all, whitebait and yellowskin are notorious. Along with the gobies, these 3 species are universally recognized by anglers as the 3 pests of the fishing world. Forget charging 30 yuan an hour. To be honest, people wouldn't even come if he offered the fishing for free. He grumbled angrily at the dog system, asking how on earth he was supposed to make this work. Not even a ghost would come to catch those fish, but the system quickly explained the conditions for completion. It turns out the reservoir currently only supported fish produced by the system. No other species could survive there yet. Furthermore, he was warned not to even think about cheating, lest he be cursed to never catch a fish again for 10,000 years. Seeing that the system had blocked all his exits, he had no choice but to call his good friend, Bai Yunhai. He told him he'd opened a spot at the Yulong reservoir and asked for 150 yuan for 5 hours of support. On the other end of the line, Bai Yunhai sounded utterly incredulous, asking Li Mu if he'd perhaps hit his head. The reservoir leaked every day and had no fish, yet here he was, asking for 150 yuan for 5 hours. Bai Yunhai wasn't buying it for a second, so Li Mu continued to lure him, swearing he had just stocked the water that very day. He claimed there were 1,000-pound black carp just waiting to be caught, but Bai Yunhai wasn't falling for it at all. Bai Yunhai told Li Mu that as friends, he should stop the nonsense, especially given the reservoir's current water level. He joked that a 1,000-pound carp would probably drink the entire reservoir dry in one go. Li Mu wondered who else he could possibly trick into coming as he stood by the water, feeling a massive headache coming on. Just then, the village widow, Yang Yulan, approached the reservoir and greeted him, surprised to see him there. She mentioned that village chief Liu told her he was back to raise fish, and she even invited him home for lunch. Now, Yang Yulan was fair-skinned and beautiful, the dream woman of every man in Yulong village. But at this moment, Li Mu felt nothing. He simply couldn't find the interest, offering a bitter smile as he greeted her, noting it had been a long time. Seeing his depressed expression, Yang Yulan asked what was wrong, wondering if he had perhaps just broken up with a girlfriend. He shook his head, explaining he didn't even have a girlfriend, before telling her all about his struggles with the fishing business. Yang Yulan smiled, relieved it wasn't a tragedy, and realized he was simply worried that no one would come to fish. She kindly offered to be his very first customer for the day to help him out. Since she didn't know how to fish and had no gear, she asked him to teach her, which, naturally, made Li Mu ecstatic. He asked if she was truly willing to pay, and without a word, she pulled out her phone and transferred the 150 yuan. Once the money arrived, he immediately grabbed a rod from his car, set up the fishing platform, and prepared the bait. He began teaching her using a standard wild fishing bait mix, determined to make her first experience a success. He prepared a 3.6-meter rod for her, adjusted the float to a standard setting, and began the lesson. We see him guiding her hand to make the very first cast, and before long, the float on the surface twitched twice. He urgently told her she had a bite and to pull the rod, and Yang Yulan reacted immediately. A whitebait and a goby were dangling from the hooks, jumping wildly, a double catch, much to their surprise. As a seasoned angler, Li Mu felt no excitement over such small fish, but for Yang Yulan, catching anything at all was a thrill. She turned to him, beaming, and exclaimed that she had actually caught 2 fish at once, finding the whole experience quite fascinating. With high spirits, Yang Yulan cast her line a second time, and almost immediately, the float vanished beneath the surface. At Li Mu's command, she pulled the rod again to find another double catch, asking him with pure excitement if he saw that. She wondered aloud if she had a hidden talent for fishing, already planning to fry her catch as a snack for later that evening. Li Mu played along with a chuckle and a nod, noting that Sister Yulan was not only beautiful but a natural at the sport. He praised her quick progress, and hearing his compliments, Yang Yulan beamed with the pure joy of a young girl. Next, Yang Yulan began fishing with a grace that was almost poetic. Seeing that she had the hang of it, Li Mu stepped back. He began to plan the future operations of the fishing grounds. About 5 minutes later, Yulan suddenly let out a sharp cry, calling his name. She begged for help, claiming the hook was caught in her clothes. When he looked over, he froze in his tracks. The hook was snagged in a rather awkward spot, right across her chest. He cleared his throat, feeling the heat rise to his face. He pointed out that the hook had barbs and suggested she could pinch it and slide it out herself. But Yulan shook her head urgently. She insisted she had already tried and failed, urging him to just do it so she could get back to her fishing. Blushing furiously, he had no choice but to step in and untangle the hook. Over the next few hours, this became a bit of a pattern. The hook seemed to have a mind of its own, constantly snagging on her clothes. He ended up helping her time and time again. 5 hours flew by. By the end, the fish bucket held at least 100 small whitebait and gobies. They were just common fish, of course. Still, Yulan was thrilled as she looked at the catch. She immediately grabbed a dozen to take home for dinner. She invited him over for a drink and a meal to celebrate. Since she had helped him complete the system task, he wanted to show his gratitude, so he didn't refuse. He waited for her to head home and start cooking. The system's voice immediately chimed in, congratulating him on completing the task and granting him a well-earned upgrade opportunity. He was given the choice to expand the water area or upgrade the fish species. After a moment of quiet reflection, he realized the current fish were already quite large, which was a good start, but the water area itself felt a bit cramped. And so, he chose to upgrade the water area. Once he confirmed his choice, the system immediately began the process. As the system expanded the boundaries of the water, it simultaneously issued his next business objective. He was tasked with inviting people to fish at the Yulong village reservoir for 30 yuan an hour, with a 5-hour minimum. If he could get 10 people to pay and fish, he would earn yet another chance for a survey upgrade. The price remained the same, but the required number of customers had increased. Still, he felt this was manageable. Even if the reservoir only held common fish for now, their impressive size would surely draw a crowd of 10 anglers. He decided to call Bai Yunhai, the owner of the fishing tackle shop, once again. Brother, help me spread the word to your group. He explained that the Yulong reservoir was now charging 150 yuan for 5 hours, asking for help to bring in some fishermen. Hearing from him for the third time, Bai Yunhai asked quite seriously if Li Mu was truly intent on running a fishing ground. It seems the shop owner thought it was all a joke, but after receiving a firm confirmation, Yunhai agreed to help. He promised to promote the spot to his fishing friends, but then he asked a very practical question. What kind of fish were actually in there? Li Mu gave a rather vague answer, simply stating there were big fish to be caught. After hanging up, he checked the time. Since it was still early for dinner, he drove into town to pick up some daily necessities and cleaning supplies. Running a fishing ground meant he couldn't commute from the city every day, so he planned to clean up the old family house. He would live there for now, with the hope of building a simple house right by the reservoir once the business became profitable. Soon, he arrived at a general store in town, but the moment he stepped out of his car, his attention was immediately captured by a beautiful woman standing nearby, and she looked remarkably familiar. We see a familiar face. Could it be Funying, the famous influencer known for lure fishing? Over the last 2 years, fishing has become a massive trend. Not only have countless fishing brands emerged, but the internet is now flooded with fishing influencers of all shapes and sizes. Some have tens of millions of followers, like Deng Gang. Though to be fair, Teacher Deng is a professional competitive angler. As a technical coach for the National Association, he is essentially the gold standard of the current fishing world. Funying, on the other hand, is a prominent female influencer in the community who specializes primarily in lure fishing. She was once a professional competitor herself, but after violating tournament rules, she received a lifetime ban from professional play. While she now films purely for entertainment, her striking looks and athletic build have made her a standout among female influencers. She is easily one of the top creators today, boasting nearly 10 million followers and averaging over 100,000 likes per video. This is top-tier influencer territory, and Limu immediately realized that if he could convince Funying to visit his reservoir, his business would become famous overnight. With that thought in mind, he walked straight over to introduce himself. He greeted her warmly, claiming to be a fan and mentioning that he ran a fishing ground very close by. He promised her that if she filmed a video there, it would be a guaranteed hit, and he invited her to give it a try. Funying looked at him with a hint of curiosity, asking if he was truly bold enough to guarantee her video would go viral. She challenged him to explain what was so unique about his spot, but Limu simply offered a mysterious smile. He told her that if it were truly unique, he couldn't just describe it, she would have to see it for herself. Since it was only a 10-minute drive, Funying hesitated for a moment. As it happened, she was actually out scouting today. She had been looking for a new location to film a scripted collaboration, never expecting someone to approach her so directly. Funying eventually nodded in agreement and called over her equipment van and her dedicated camera crew. She had them reenact their initial meeting for the camera before following Limu's car toward the reservoir. They soon arrived at the Yulong Reservoir, and upon seeing the site, Limu himself was suddenly taken aback. We see that the reservoir, which was originally only about half an acre, has now expanded to more than 10 times its previous size. The water now covers much of the previously exposed mountain bay. It seems that while Limu was away, the system had automatically completed its upgrade. Combined with the backdrop of the rear bay, the scenery was far more beautiful than before. Even Funying couldn't help but let out a soft exclamation, telling him that the view at his fishing ground was truly impressive. She noted it looked almost too natural to be a commercial site, but to be honest, that was exactly the vibe she wanted for her video. With that, Funying decided right then and there to start fishing. She pulled out her phone to handle the business side of things. Right in front of the camera, she paid the 150 yuan fee and began setting up her professional gear to begin the session. Meanwhile, Limu recorded the entire scene on his own phone and sent the footage directly to Bai Yunhai. Bai Yunhai messaged back almost instantly, clearly stunned that he had actually managed to get a star like Funying to fish at his place. She told him she was coming over immediately, claiming that with Funying there, even a 500 yuan fee would be a bargain. Limu chuckled to himself and asked Bai Yunhai to share the video in her local fishing groups to spread the word. Predictably, the group chat exploded. Over 500 eager anglers began tagging Bai Yunhai all at once, demanding the exact location of the reservoir. After all, the chance to fish in the same spot as a beauty like Funying doesn't come around very often. Seeing the overwhelming feedback Bai Yunhai was receiving, Limu felt a surge of excitement. It seemed the system's task of collecting fees from 10 different people was going to be much easier than he expected. Once Funying was settled, he received a call from Yang Yulan inviting him over for a meal, so he headed to her home. On the table, he found a plate of fried fish and a steaming bowl of Green River fish and tofu soup. He noticed that Yang Yulan, who had been barefaced earlier, had specially applied light makeup and even a hint of perfume. Deep down, he felt the atmosphere between them shifting. It was becoming a bit unusual. She even brought out a bottle of fine wine. However, Limu politely declined the drink, telling Yulan that they really shouldn't be drinking in the middle of the day. Limu explained that many anglers would be arriving that afternoon, and he hoped Yulan could help him by recording the catches and guiding the newcomers. He promised to pay her for the help once they were finished, but Yang Yulan simply responded with a knowing smile. She told him there was no need to talk about money between them, and that if he ever needed her help, he only had to ask. As she put the wine back in the cabinet, she suggested they could always have a drink together later that evening instead. She even added that he could stay the night since she had plenty of empty rooms, a suggestion that, to be honest, made his heart skip a beat. He quickly sat down to focus on his meal. Meanwhile, back at the Yulong Reservoir, Funying had selected her equipment for the day. We see her setting up a 4.5-meter handing integrated hand rod, using a standard 2+1 line combination. She paired it with a number 4 Jinhaxi float and prepared her bait using a Hellcat aromatic blend mixed with a bit of gluten powder. After starting with bottom fishing, she adjusted her float to a more sensitive setting to better detect the subtle nibbles on the bait. With everything prepared, Funying quickly settled into her rhythm, but after about half an hour, something began to feel off. The fishing conditions at this reservoir were proving to be, shall we say, a bit frustrating for a professional like her. It seemed that no matter where she cast, she caught nothing but small bait stealers like bitterlings, topmouth gudgeons, and sleeper gobies. It felt as though these were the only 3 species in the entire reservoir. She recalled the owner mentioning the place was unique. She wondered if these annoying little fish were the unique feature he meant, feeling certain she had been swindled by the owner. Unable to keep it in, Funying complained to her assistant, Xiaoli, telling her she felt they had been completely scammed. She lamented that there weren't any real fish to be found, but Xiaoli just smiled and offered a different perspective. Xiaoli noted that being scammed could actually be a great hook for the video, and might even help it go viral once it was posted. Funying gave a bitter smile and nodded, deciding to change her tactics by trying to fish slightly off the bottom with larger bait. Yet, the result remained the same, more small fry and gobies, with not a single normal-sized fish in sight. Catching nothing but trash fish would test anyone's patience, and just as Funying was about to give up entirely, things took a turn. She was just about to find the owner to demand a refund when, suddenly, her rod tensed up with a significant weight. The rod bent nearly to its breaking point, and Funying's face lit up as she realized this definitely wasn't another trash fish. She raised the rod to control the catch, and after a brief struggle, her assistant Xiaoli grabbed the net, ready to scoop it up. When Funying saw the tail break the surface, she shouted in excitement, convinced that she had hooked a predatory coulter. She wondered why the owner hadn't let her use lures if there were coulters here, but Xiaoli, looking at the fish in the net, began to have her doubts, suggesting that it didn't quite look like a coulter at all, though Funying didn't hesitate to disagree. She brushed off the comment, asking what else it could possibly be at that size, given her extensive experience with lure fishing. She was certain she knew her fish, and impatiently told Xiaoli to bring the net closer so they could take a proper look. As it turned out, the fish in the net was actually a massive hemicoulter, a common minnow, weighing nearly 3 pounds. Since minnows and coulters look remarkably similar, a specimen of this size could easily be mistaken for the other from a distance. At that moment, Funying's emotions were incredibly complicated, leaving her feeling as though she might actually burst into tears. Yet, there was a spark of genuine surprise. After all, she had never seen a common minnow grow to such an absurd size. She realized that if she posted this, the video would almost certainly go viral. Perhaps this was the surprise the owner mentioned. Beside her, Xiaoli didn't waste a second, immediately pointing the camera lens directly at the giant, shimmering fish. Funying removed the hook and held the fish up, wearing an expression that sat somewhere between a smile and a sob for the camera. She told her viewers that she finally understood what the owner meant by a guaranteed viral surprise, asking if they'd ever seen such a fish. It felt like it weighed at least 3 pounds, and its length was pushing nearly 50 centimeters, a true monster of its kind. Funying quickly placed the giant minnow into her keep net and cast her line again, her frustration replaced by a new curiosity. She wanted to see what other surprises this reservoir might be hiding. While at that same moment, Li Mu was strolling back. He walked toward the fishing grounds at a leisurely pace, still savoring the memory of the delicious fish he had eaten for lunch. Li Mu thought to himself that while Sister Yulan's cooking was excellent, the real secret was likely the high-quality fish produced by his system. The meat was simply superior, and if that remained the case, his fishing grounds would soon be doing a very brisk business indeed. After all, most people avoid eating fish from standard commercial ponds because they're raised on artificial feed, but this was different. As we see him arrive back at the water, Funying immediately began to complain, accusing him of charging her 150 yuan just to catch minnows. She was indignant that he had sent her into the mountains only to find common species like hemicoulter, bitterlings, and sleepers. Even though she had landed that giant minnow, she still felt a sense of disappointment, which is why she couldn't help but grumble the moment she saw him. Li Mu, however, feigned complete shock, addressing her as the great beauty Funying, while maintaining a perfectly straight face. He told her not to spread such rumors, insisting his reservoir was full of variety and that she had likely only seen those small species because she'd just started. He suggested that since it was currently midday, it was only natural that the smaller, more aggressive fish were the ones biting. As the old saying goes, even the gods find it hard to catch big fish at noon. Usually, only the trash fish are active during the heat of the day. His explanation left Funying momentarily speechless, and to be honest, she didn't have much of an argument to fire back with. Just then, her rod tensed again, and she pulled up a double catch, a half-pound bitterling, and an even more surprising companion. The other was a 2-pound sleeper, an absolute giant for its species, leaving Funying staring at her line in utter disbelief. Beside her, Xiaoli didn't miss a beat, swinging the camera around to capture the massive specimens while Li Mu acted genuinely startled. He cried out in surprise at the size of the sleeper, remarking that its appearance was actually quite intimidating at that scale. He claimed he had never caught anything that large in his own reservoir, praising Funying for truly living up to her reputation as a professional. Funying opened her mouth to respond, but she was suddenly interrupted by a loud shout echoing from the distance. We see Li Mu turn toward the sound, only to find that Bai Yunhai had actually driven all the way from the county seat to find them. Li Mu excused himself from Funying and went to greet him, noting how fast he had arrived, but Bai Yunhai wasn't really listening. His eyes were scanning the shoreline frantically as he asked Li Mu where Funying was, desperate to find a spot right next to her. Li Mu casually pointed toward Funying's spot, and the moment Bai Yunhai saw her, he excitedly began pulling his gear out of the car. He was ready to rush over and fish right next to her, but Li Mu reached out and firmly caught him by the arm. He told his friend that while they were like brothers, business was business, and today, Bai Yunhai would have to step over his dead body first. Unless he paid the 150 yuan fishing fee, he wasn't catching a single thing, mostly because Li Mu needed to complete his system mission. Besides, Bai Yunhai had spent years tricking him into buying rods at his tackle shop, making quite a bit of money off him in the process. To be honest, this 150 yuan fee was just a drop in the bucket, and seeing Li Mu's determined face, Bai Yunhai knew he had no choice. He obediently pulled out his phone to scan the code and pay, and once the transaction was done, he grabbed his gear and hurried off. He ran toward Funying with high spirits, but as he left, Limu noticed something happening on the road below the reservoir. A steady stream of cars was driving toward them, and as we watched the line grow, Limu estimated there were at least 20 vehicles. There were more than 20 cars in total, leaving Yang Yulan, who was directing traffic at the intersection, completely stunned. It was the first time Yulong Village had ever been this lively, and soon a large crowd carrying fishing gear arrived at the site. After paying their fees, everyone crowded around Funying. It seems the allure of the #1 beauty of lure fishing was truly formidable. Her influence was almost terrifying, and considering it was a workday, the turnout was nothing short of impressive. If it had been a weekend or after work hours, there likely would have been even more people, but he counted 36 anglers already. Between them all, he had collected 5,400 yuan in fees today, and Limu took a satisfied stroll along the water's edge to admire the scene. However, he soon realized a major problem. While the giant minnows and sleepers provided a nice surprise, they weren't enough. With so many people fishing, it was fine if 1 or 2 people failed to catch anything significant, but if everyone missed out, things would turn sour. If they couldn't land any other types of fish, he feared these anglers would start demanding their money back. After all, trash fish are still just trash fish, and in the long run, this kind of hype wouldn't last forever. It certainly wasn't a sustainable plan, but fortunately, his new business mission had already been completed ahead of schedule. At this point, he only needed to wait for 10 more people to finish fishing before he could use the system to upgrade the fish species. However, the very problem he had been worrying about soon surfaced among the crowd of anglers, including Bai Yunhai. They all began to question why the reservoir seemed to be filled with nothing but small fry, especially after paying a 150 yuan fee. Since not a single proper fish had been caught yet, some of the men were already starting to grumble and complain. Fortunately, a few people started pulling in 1 or 2 pound minnows or 3 pound sleepers, which helped calm the mood. These catches managed to distract the disgruntled group, and the fact that Funying was still fishing patiently kept them in their spots. And so, the anglers suppressed their impatience and stayed put, continuing their efforts all the way until 4 in the afternoon. At that point, Funying decided to pack up her gear and head home, so Limu walked over to say his goodbyes. He jokingly asked the great beauty if she was done already, even offering to let her keep fishing for free since her time was up. Funying shook her head and explained that she had things to do later, noting that she had already finished filming her video. Limu bid her farewell and invited her back, but before she left, he couldn't resist asking her one more thing. He asked if the surprise and the promise of a viral hit lived up to his word, and Funying nodded happily, confirming there were indeed surprises. She was sure the video would go viral, but then she pointed out that there didn't seem to be any other types of fish in the pond. Limu immediately denied it, insisting it was impossible and claiming the other fish simply hadn't started biting yet. Funying just gave him a knowing smile, teasing him for telling tall tales when dozens of anglers hadn't seen a single different species. He remained stubborn, telling her that if she didn't believe him, that was her loss, but his other fish were definitely there. He claimed that once the feeding window opened, they'd be jumping out of the water. Funying just chuckled, said goodbye, and left. However, something happened that Limu hadn't quite expected. The moment Funying walked away, the crowd began to follow. There had been over 60 people fishing, but in the blink of an eye, only about 10 remained at the reservoir. He realized then that Funying's influence wasn't just powerful, it was the only thing holding the whole operation together. The real issue, as we see, was that the fishing itself just wasn't holding up, mostly because of those super minnows and super sleepers. The anglers had seen enough of those small fry, and since no other species had appeared, they were starting to lose interest. Limu knew that if he relied solely on novelty to attract people, these folks likely wouldn't bother coming back a second time. And so, he immediately checked with the system to see if the new business objective had been met, and the system replied instantly. It confirmed that he had indeed earned a new upgrade for the fishing grounds, and asked if he wanted to use it right away. He didn't hesitate for a second, instructing the system to upgrade the fish species immediately, and the system acknowledged the command. After a quick randomized draw, the system congratulated him on unlocking a new species. The topmouth coulter was now officially added. A topmouth coulter? Upon hearing this, a wide grin spread across his face, and for good reason, to be perfectly honest. The coulter is one of the most prized catches for any serious angler, a medium-sized species that simply can't be compared to trash fish. Usually, catching 1 over 5 pounds is enough to make an angler ecstatic, and if they manage to break a personal record, it's enough to make them shout for joy. Plus, because the meat is so delicious, its market value is incredibly high. Pure wild ones can fetch nearly 100 yuan per pound, and they are also the primary target for lure fishing enthusiasts. Since the Yulong Village reservoir wasn't quite large enough yet, he decided he would have to stick to traditional pole fishing for now. He grew even more excited realizing that these system-upgraded fish could reach the absolute theoretical growth limit for their species. Everything was finally falling into place, and he felt certain the fishing grounds were about to take off. However, just then, The system presented him with a brand new business task. He was to invite people to fish at the reservoir for 100 yuan per hour. There was a catch, of course. The system required a minimum booking of 5 hours per person. If he could get 20 people to pay and fish under these terms, he would immediately earn another upgrade for the grounds. After hearing the details of this new task, Li Mu took a sharp breath. At 100 yuan an hour, that was quite the steep price. That meant charging 500 yuan for a single session, though luckily, with the new coulters in the water, the price wasn't entirely unfair. But it certainly wasn't cheap either. Just as Li Mu thought the topmouth coulters were all set to save the day, and that the anglers would surely keep fishing, the reality was quite different. The remaining 10 or so fishermen were actually getting ready to leave. He immediately stepped forward to stop them, reminding them they still had time left. He urged them to stay a bit longer, but the 10 anglers all replied with the same collective complaint. They told the boss that while the minnows in this reservoir were large, catching nothing but trash fish just wasn't interesting. Despite his best efforts to convince them there were other species in the water, those 10 anglers left anyway. One by one, the fishermen continued to depart until the entire reservoir was empty, save for by Yunhai and one other man in his 30s. At that moment, Yunhai started complaining to him with no filter at all. He asked Li Mu what on earth he was playing at, calling the whole situation a complete ripoff. He argued that a reservoir full of trash fish was a waste of all the popularity Feng Yin had brought him. Li Mu gave Yunhai an annoyed look, telling the boy to keep his mouth shut and just focus on his fishing. Yunhai took offense, claiming he was only looking out for him, and decided that he might as well leave too. With that, Yunhai packed up his gear to head home, and even had the nerve to ask for a refund on his way out. Li Mu told him exactly where to go. Frustrated at not catching anything, the boy stomped off toward the back hills, helping himself to some plums and loquats along the way. Still feeling unsatisfied, to be perfectly honest, he grabbed several handfuls of wild leeks from the roadside before finally disappearing. Once Yunhai was gone, the last remaining man left as well. The once bustling reservoir was now so quiet you couldn't find a soul. Although he had managed to make 5,000 yuan today, thanks to Feng Yin's influence, he knew such opportunities wouldn't happen every day. Fortunately, Feng Yin still had to post his video. Once that video went live, the popularity would surely surge again as soon as people caught the new coulters. He was willing to bet that once that happened, no one would want to leave. So, Li Mu decided to spend the entire night fishing personally. His goal was to test the activity of the topmouth coulters. If he could just land one giant fish, he could have by Yunhai post the photos to his fishing groups again, which would surely bring the crowds back. With that plan in mind, he immediately took his belongings back to the old house and gave the place a quick, much-needed cleaning. After that, he prepared 100 pounds of bait. As the old saying goes, if you don't bait the spot, you won't catch a lot. Once everything was ready, he was about to settle for a simple bowl of instant noodles for his dinner. But then he received a phone call from Yang Yulan. She told him she'd noticed all the fishermen had left the reservoir. She invited him over to her place, promising to cook him a proper meal. The sound of Yulan's voice over the phone sent a bit of a shiver down his spine. He couldn't help but wonder if she really just wanted to feed him dinner, or if she had something else on the menu entirely. Still, being too lazy to cook for himself, he didn't refuse. He soon arrived at Yulan's house, where several large, hearty dishes were already waiting on the table. During the meal, he told her that he wanted to pay her 3,000 yuan a month to handle the cooking for him. And for the visiting fishermen, he knew that once the popularity returned, he'd need to provide meals to keep the anglers happy. Yulan immediately refused the money, insisting she was free anyway and happy to help him for nothing. However, he felt it wasn't right to just take her help, so he insisted on a salary. And so, the matter was settled. After finishing dinner, he gathered his things for the night fishing trip. Seeing him prepare to leave, Yulan tried to persuade him to stay. She warned him that fishing at night wasn't safe and suggested he stay at her house to keep her company instead. He shook his head, telling her not to worry. He needed to test the fish density tonight and told her to get some rest. With that, he left with his gear. As he passed the cornfield near Yulan's front door, he reached out and picked a dozen ears of tender corn. After all, fresh corn is essential for catching coulters. Soon, he reached the water's edge. He began peeling the tender corn into a large basin, feeling confident that tonight was going to be an absolute success. If he could land a single topmouth coulter weighing over 10 pounds and have by Yunhai post it, the reaction would be explosive. And if he managed to catch a 20-pound monster, it would surely send shockwaves through the entire local fishing community. After all, places where one can find coulters over 20 pounds are incredibly rare across the entire country. At this moment, his inner fisherman's blood was boiling with excitement, but just as he was about to set his gear, a motorcycle came racing toward him, and out stepped a middle-aged man with deeply tanned, weathered skin. The man carried his fishing gear over and asked, "Hey brother, are you the owner of this reservoir?" Li Mu nodded and asked the older man if he was there to fish, to which the man gave a dry chuckle. "Brother, don't call me uncle. I'm only 27. It's just that years of fishing in the sun have aged me a bit. So what are your rates?" Li Mu froze for a second, looking at the man's face in disbelief. To be honest, the man's forehead wrinkles looked deep enough to rival his grandfather's, but Li Mu didn't dwell on it. He simply told the man the price, 100 yuan per hour, or 5 hours for a flat 400. The man was visibly stunned by the quote. "That's expensive. What kind of fish do you even have in here?" Li Mu explained that the reservoir was strictly for top-mouth culters, with the largest ones reaching nearly 20 pounds. He added that if the man didn't want to keep the fish, he could sell them back to the reservoir for 2 yuan per pound. However, any fish over 10 pounds had to be returned. The man fell silent for a moment, weighing his options. "You only pay 2 yuan a pound? I'd have to catch 50 pounds of fish just to break even." Sensing the man was losing interest, Li Mu grew a bit impatient and told him those were the fixed prices. "If you think your skills are up to it, pay the fee. If not, you might as well head back home." He assumed the deal was dead, but to his surprise, the man just laughed and reminded him of what he'd said. "If there are 20-pound culters in here, I'll just pull one out and break even immediately. Tonight, I'm taking you for all you've got." With that, the man, who we'll call Uncle for now, cheerfully scanned the code to pay and then set up right next to Li Mu's chosen spot. He began his preparations by pulling out a box of live bait, specifically silver bait fish, which are known to be quite effective. After carefully hooking the silver bait, the man looked over at Li Mu and gave him a proud, knowing smile. Watching this, Li Mu couldn't help but feel amused. Most commercial fishing pits strictly forbid the use of live bait, after all. This is because live bait is far more attractive to predatory fish than standard processed lures or corn. The man clearly thought he had found a clever loophole in the rules, while Li Mu simply nodded with a faint, mysterious smile. "Uncle, I'd advise against using that bait," Li Mu suggested. "I have some free corn here that I can give you instead." The man wasn't interested in the charity, offering only a cold laugh. "Boss, if you're running a business, you have to be prepared to lose. Otherwise, this place will go belly up in no time." Hearing this, Li Mu shook his head and let out a soft sigh. "Fine then, since you seem to think I'm just afraid of losing, have it your way. I'm offering this corn for free now, but if you change your mind later, I'll be charging 100 yuan per kernel." The man waved him off dismissively. "Brother, I'm a man of my word. I'll take that bet with you right now. If I end up needing your corn, I'll pay you 200 yuan per piece. Whoever regrets it is a coward." Li Mu simply shrugged and let the man get to it. With a confident flick of his wrist, the man cast his line deep into the reservoir. But just as he settled his rod and reached for a cigarette, something unexpected happened. His luminous float suddenly flickered with a signal. He immediately gripped the end of the rod, ready for action. His eyes were locked onto the water with total concentration, though he still found a moment to tease our protagonist. "Brother, with the fish biting like this, it looks like I'm definitely winning tonight." And just as the words left his mouth, the float vanished beneath the surface in a massive strike. The man let out a low grunt and violently struck to set the hook. As he began to play the fish, he called out confidently, claiming that based on his years of experience, this was a sure thing. He was certain it was a 2 or 3 pound coulter, and a moment later, he triumphantly scooped the fish up with his net. But as he looked down at his catch, he froze in utter disbelief, wondering aloud what on earth he had just caught. It certainly wasn't a coulter. He took a closer look, and his eyes widened even further in shock. He couldn't believe his luck. It was a giant hemicoulter, a common bait fish. Nearby, Li Mu simply smiled and said nothing. The man started to get a bit agitated, asking why Li Mu hadn't warned him that this pit was full of such massive bait fish. Li Mu grinned and pointed out that the man hadn't actually asked. Realizing he had no argument, the man fell silent. He decided to keep using his live bait, but from that point on, every time he cast his line into the water, he caught either more bait fish or small gobies. In short, he wasn't catching anything he actually wanted. Seeing that he was about to be outplayed, he desperately tried changing his technique, but no matter what he did, those pesky little fish stuck to his hook like glue. He couldn't seem to shake them off. This was because live bait is a favorite for these small scavengers, which is exactly why Li Mu hadn't stopped him earlier. And so, after being tormented by the tiny fish for another half hour, the man finally gave in. He walked over with a sheepish smile and asked if Li Mu would sell him some of that corn after all. He admitted that the live bait was making it impossible to fish properly. Li Mu, of course, just chuckled softly. He reminded the man of their earlier deal. He had offered the corn for free, but the man insisted on paying 200 yuan. He even recalled the man's boast about who would be the coward, noting he didn't want to take advantage of him. The man's face turned a shade of green. He had said the words himself, and he had done the bragging himself, too. He had set out to teach the boss a lesson, but instead, he was the one being schooled by a bunch of tiny fish. Gritting his teeth, the man admitted defeat, acknowledging that despite his years of experience, Li Mu had bested him. He never imagined that before the real fishing even began, he'd be outmaneuvered by the pond owner. He sighed and asked for 2 pieces of corn. True to his word, he paid 200 yuan per piece. The man pulled out his phone and scanned a payment of 400 to Li Mu. Having secured his expensive corn, he retreated, while Li Mu finished adjusting his float. Since coulters aren't bottom feeders, we see him changing tactics. They prefer moving prey, so the secret here is to keep baiting the area while fishing to maintain a constant dynamic flow. Soon, Li Mu had everything prepared. He settled into his fishing chair and equipped his float with a luminous battery for the evening. For this round, he chose a 7-meter heavy-duty rod with a sturdy line setup. He was clearly prepared for something substantial. He used size 12 barbless double hooks, carefully baiting them with the fresh, tender corn that had caused such a stir earlier. After casting his line into the water, he lit a cigarette, keeping a watchful eye on his glowing float as the sun began to set. With one hand, he reached into a basin to gently rub the fresh corn kernels. He wasn't trying to crush them, mind you. The goal was to bruise them just enough so that each kernel released a bit of juice. This makes them far more enticing as bait. Whether used on the hook or thrown in as a dynamic lure, the effect is significantly improved by this little trick. Meanwhile, the older man rejoined the fray with his new corn. As they waited, Limu received a message from Bai Yunhai. He had been added to a massive chat group with over 500 fishing enthusiasts. He simply dropped in to say hello. The group erupted instantly. People couldn't believe it, asking if this was truly the famous owner of the Yulong village reservoir. The excitement was palpable as members confirmed his identity. It seems Limu's reputation had preceded him. After dismissing a few jokes from the group members, he sent out a polite, collective response to the community. He invited them all to visit Yulong village again soon. Just as he sent the message, his luminous float flickered twice. He immediately went on high alert. Unfortunately, the fish didn't take the bait, and the water went still once more. Suddenly, a shout came from the man nearby, followed by the sharp whistle of a rod cutting through the air. Limu looked over. The man's rod was already bent into a deep arc. He struggled to control the fish, his face lighting up with pure excitement. I only threw in 2 scoops of corn, and I've already hooked one, the man shouted. Boss, your place really is something. He was certain it was a coulter, though perhaps a bit on the small side. As the older man's voice trailed off, we see him pulling up a coulter weighing about a kilogram. Limu was about to respond, but right at that moment, his own luminous float flickered twice on the water's surface before suddenly plunging deep into the darkness. He reacted instantly, jerking the rod upward. A second later, the sharp whistle of the main line cutting through the air echoed out. He gripped the rod tightly with both hands, feeling the raw tension and the vibration of the line humming against the wind. In an instant, he was fully alert. To a fisherman, this intense struggle isn't work, it's a form of pure enjoyment. That specific humming sound from the line and rod is, to be honest, the most beautiful music any angler could ever hear. Hold steady, boss. I'll help you net it, the older man called out, having just finished putting his own catch away. Seeing the struggle, he stood up and grabbed the landing net Limu had left nearby, ready to assist at a moment's notice. Limu, however, had another request. Uncle, could you use your phone to record a quick video for me first? The man nodded and began filming. Although the sky had turned dark by now, it didn't hinder them in the slightest. They both had their headlamps on, providing plenty of light. Even though Limu had managed to keep the rod upright, the hooked coulter continued to fight with incredible power, making the line scream as it sliced through the water. The fish began a desperate dash to one side. Limu had to stand up and hug the rod, moving with the fish's momentum. He paced along the bank, following the pull. Only when the initial burst of strength began to fade did he dare to take control. He began using the figure-8 technique, carefully guiding the fish back toward the shore with steady pressure. His line setup wasn't particularly heavy, and he knew that if he used brute force, he risked snapping the line and losing the catch. After wearing the fish down for a while, he tried to step back to gain more leverage, but the fish wasn't finished yet. Suddenly, it surged with a new burst of energy, this time charging straight out toward the center of the distant water. The fish dove diagonally toward the depths. It wasn't giving up yet, forcing Limu to lung forward to keep his balance. Just as he nearly tumbled into the water, he planted his foot firmly. The line continued to scream, vibrating with raw power. The entire rod bent into a massive arc, the tip nearly touching the water's surface as it groaned under the fish's weight. The rod pulsed with every surge, a feeling that is truly exhilarating, though it carries a high risk of the line snapping. Since he hadn't attached a safety rope, he had to risk losing the catch and quickly tilted the rod to one side. It was a gamble. Either the fish would tire and be guided back, or it would keep charging and snap the line instantly. Fortunately, the fish wasn't quite a monster yet. Its strength began to wane, and the tension finally started to ease. He successfully regained control, and we see that the battle was nearly won. Minutes later, he began stepping back with the rod. The fish made 2 more desperate attempts to escape during the process, but they were weak and easily managed. Finally, the body of the fish broke the surface. Boss, that's incredible, the older man shouted in pure admiration. That one is way bigger than mine. Limu called back. Quick, uncle, get the net ready. Following the command, the man scooped the fish into the net. Limu set his rod aside and rushed over to help. He gripped the net and hauled the catch onto the bank. At first glance, he estimated it wasn't quite 10 kilograms. The man kept the camera focused on the coulter, marveling at it. He had seen many farmed fish, but nothing like this. To be honest, boss, he remarked, I've rarely seen a coulter with such perfect color and condition. The man even used his hand to measure the length. It was a respectable specimen, roughly 76 centimeters long. Limu found his hand scale and weighed the fish in front of the camera. It came in at exactly 3.1 kilograms. Despite the impressive catch, he felt a hint of disappointment. His goal for the night was a trophy of at least 5 kilograms. The older man, however, was now fully convinced that giant fish lived in these waters. After a quick cleanup, Limu placed the fish in the keep net and returned to his seat, feeling refreshed. He then asked the man to continue. Li Mu asked the man to send him the video, and once it arrived, he immediately shared it with the fishing group chat. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned his focus to the water, but his WeChat notifications began to explode. Deep down, he was amused, thinking that the other anglers must be losing their minds. Meanwhile, Wang Defa arrived on the scene. Defa showed the bound black carp to a man in a yellow hat, who was visibly shocked by the massive, grayscaled fish. The man in the yellow hat couldn't believe his eyes, shouting that they needed to get the fish into an oxygen tank immediately. He was worried that if the fish died now, it wouldn't be fresh enough for a premium sale later on. Without needing to be asked, Yellow Hat pulled an electronic scale from his vehicle, and he and Defa worked together. They hoisted the heavy carp onto the scale, and we see the weight settle at exactly 15.8 kilograms. Yellow Hat's voice trembled with excitement as he told Li Mu that his luck was simply out of this world. He admitted he was completely impressed that Li Mu could land such a top-tier catch, circling the fish in pure wonder. He inspected and touched the carp repeatedly, already deciding to flip it to a high-end hotel for a handsome profit. Li Mu simply gave a calm smile and told Yellow Hat to calculate the price and handle the fish as quickly as possible. He pointed out that the hook had injured the fish's mouth, and he wasn't sure how much longer it would stay alive. After a moment of thought, Yellow Hat looked at Li Mu and offered 25 yuan per kilogram for the wild carp. He asked Li Mu if that price was acceptable, and our protagonist couldn't help but offer a satisfied smile. It seemed Yellow Hat was being quite fair, considering the standard market price for black carp is usually only 15 yuan. Given that the fish was injured, offering 25 yuan meant Yellow Hat certainly wasn't trying to cheat him. In the end, based on that premium rate, Yellow Hat paid him a total of 800 yuan for the catch. Li Mu had originally expected only 400 or 500, so this result had far exceeded his initial expectations. After happily completing the transfer, Yellow Hat started his van and drove off to deliver the massive black carp. At this moment, we noticed the drone in the sky descending a bit lower, clearly intent on capturing every detail of the transaction. Simultaneously, the drone transmits their entire conversation back to the live stream, where the viewers are once again whipped into a frenzy. One viewer exclaims that selling a single fish for 800 yuan is practically equivalent to 3 days of their salary. Another replies that there's no need for surprise, noting that if the fish hadn't been injured, it would have fetched even more. Apparently, in some regions, wild black carp are so highly prized that people would fight to buy them for 30 yuan per gene. Back at the riverbank, Wang Defa watches as the 800 yuan notification pops up on Li Mu's phone. He is genuinely thrilled for his friend, remarking that they have truly struck it big today. Believing that good fortune should be shared, Li Mu decides to send 400 yuan over to his friend, Fatty Wang. He knew quite well that without Defa's help with the landing net, that massive fish likely would have escaped. However, when Defa sees the transfer, he doesn't just ignore it. He immediately hits the refund button. With a look of confusion, Defa asks Li Mu what on earth he thinks he's doing. He insists he cannot take the money, but Li Mu simply sends it again, patiently explaining his reasoning. He tells Defa that while he caught the fish, the assist with the net was vital, and they should share the rewards. Li Mu goes as far as to order him to accept it, threatening to never fish with him again, which was a bit dramatic, perhaps. Defa finally relents and accepts the money, jokingly calling Li Mu his godfather and claiming he has no other way to repay him. He then offers to serenade Li Mu with a rendition of the song Father and begins clearing his throat to perform. Li Mu immediately cuts him off before the noise attack can begin, putting an end to the musical tribute. This comedic display has the livestream audience in stitches, with comments pouring in about how entertaining these two are. While the two are joking around, Li Mu receives a phone call from Xiao Chun, his former apprentice from his old job. As soon as he picks up, Xiao Chun excitedly shouts that both Li Mu and Brother Wang have actually made it onto television. Xiao Chun explains that just moments ago, tens of thousands of people in the live stream were watching them battle that massive black carp. He tells them the entertainment value was off the charts, leaving Li Mu standing there in a state of complete shock. Subconsciously, Li Mu looks up at the drone circling in the sky, and in that instant, everything finally clicks into place. It turns out the drone following them wasn't just wandering, it was broadcasting their every move, much to Wang Defa's surprise. Defa quickly pulls up the official Nanxing livestream on his phone, his hands trembling with excitement as he shows the screen to Li Mu. He exclaims in disbelief that they really are live, and the whole world is watching them fish. With the viewer count hitting 30,000, Defa wonders aloud if they've finally become famous, a bold thought, to be sure. Li Mu offers a calm, bitter laugh, jokingly scolding Fatty Wang and suggesting they aren't famous so much as they are exposed. He reminds his friend that since the cameras were rolling, Defa's recent bathroom break by the river was likely broadcast to everyone. Defa's face turns a deep shade of red, but he only stays embarrassed for about 2 seconds before turning back to Li Mu with a grin. He jokes that if his private moment was caught on camera, every other man in the live stream is probably feeling quite insecure right now. Just then, the drone descends even lower, and a voice begins to crackle through the small built-in speaker attached to the machine. The female host introduces herself as a representative from the beautiful Nanxing official media center. She politely asks the two fishermen if they would be open to a brief interview for the broadcast. Limu and Wang Defa trade a look of pure astonishment, wondering why the official media would care so much about a simple fishing trip. Defa whispers that this is a golden opportunity for fame, noting that even if they don't see the benefits yet, it's good to be known. He suggests that building a reputation now might come in handy later, and we see Limu start to consider the possibility. Wang's words strike a chord. While Limu must keep his system a secret, he realizes he can use this to build a persona as a master angler. At that exact moment, the livestream chat explodes with activity once again, the screen filling with messages of support. Viewers declare the duo incredibly entertaining, with many promising to follow them and even try to run into these big brothers tomorrow. Next, the female host begins her interview, focusing on Limu's fishing insights and the mental journey of battling that massive fish. As he faces her questions, Limu starts rambling about professional techniques, discussing everything from general fishing to bait ratios. Wang Fatty Defa stands by his side, playing the perfect hype man by claiming Limu's bait mixing skills are truly legendary. He jokes that the scent is so good, not only do the fish come running, but even he wants to eat a few pounds of it. Defa's sense of humor sends the live stream chat into fits of laughter, and just like that, the interview wraps up after a few minutes. Thanks to the natural chemistry between our two friends, the popularity of the live stream climbs even higher than before. Limu even notices several fishing gear manufacturers in the chat, all of them asking for contact information to discuss potential brand deals. In that moment, he begins to see a future path for himself, one that seems to be opening up quite unexpectedly. It's a path that looks even wider than the Qinglong River itself, though he knows it's all thanks to his Fishing King system. Once the broadcast ends, Wang Defa steps back into his professional element as a media expert to offer some serious advice. He tells Limu they should strike while the iron is hot and build a personal brand, having already thought of the perfect name. He suggests calling themselves the Baogan Brothers, where Limu handles the technical skill and the good looks. Defa, meanwhile, would focus entirely on the comedy and making his friend look good, a role he was born for, really. Limu considers the proposal and realizes it's actually quite viable, especially since the system already provides him a steady income. If the internet fame works out, that's great. If not, he hasn't lost anything. So, he tells Defa he's on board with the plan. He promises to register the accounts when he gets home tonight, but for now, it's only 1 in the afternoon. Limu decides he needs to head back and grab another fishing rod to keep the momentum going, but Defa has another idea. Defa immediately offers to have someone deliver a rod, so Limu doesn't have to make the trip, but Limu politely declines. With plenty of system points to spend, he plans to simply purchase a high-end set of rods and lines directly from the system shop. And so, he hops on his electric scooter and heads home, his mind racing with the possibilities of everything that just happened. Between his unexpected viral fame and the generous rewards from his catch, Limu's system balance is looking quite healthy. Counting the 800 from this morning and the 1580 from the afternoon, plus the cash from Fatty Wong, which includes another 5,880 plus 800, his total earnings have reached 3,760. And that's not even counting the surplus stock he still has, the cash returned by the system alone, including the morning's 800 and the afternoon's 1,580, combined with Fatty Wong's purchase price, makes for a very successful day indeed. 20 minutes later, we see him return home in high spirits, only to find the house completely empty when he opens the door. Checking his phone, he sees a message from his wife saying she's taken their daughter to visit her parents for the day. Since he has the house to himself, he takes the opportunity to open the system panel and first upgrades his fishing rank. By promoting himself from angler to fishing master, he unlocks a 20% chance to double his cash rewards, a nice bonus, surely. Next, he opens the equipment section of the system shop and decides to spend 1,700 points on a total gear overhaul. He redeems a set of beginner hand rods that reduce physical exhaustion by 20% during those long 6-hour sessions. These rods are guaranteed not to break under 80 pounds. He also grabs a beginner lure rod that is irresistible to predatory fish. It increases attraction by 50% and casting distance by 20%, and even comes with a specialized anti-tangle bait casting reel. The movement of the lures becomes even more lifelike, and he adds 200 meters of beginner fishing line that is both durable and soft. The line features enhanced invisibility, and he rounds it out with 10 sets of beginner hooks that are nearly impossible to straighten or deform. Finally, he gets a 29-liter fishing box with built-in insulation and a comfortable seat that slowly restores his stamina. After reviewing the descriptions of his new gear, he figures that since no one is home, he might as well take the plunge. He extracts the entire pile of equipment at once, though he realizes the lure rod and the large fishing box aren't needed just yet. So, taking only the hand rod, line, and hooks, he heads out and runs into Brother Go, the head of Yulong Village. As it happens, Biyun Haiqing has sent over some supplies, and Brother Go tells him to go ahead and grab them from the car. And so, he decides it's time to start grooming Brother Go to help him manage the reservoir, beginning with a simple offer. He tells him, "Brother Go, come help me move some things, and from today on, I'll cover your meals and your cigarettes." The The moment Brother Go hears about the food and smokes, he nods enthusiastically and follows along to help with the heavy lifting. Before long, we see them reach the road where Byun-hai's car is waiting. The driver steps out to greet them. Byun-hai takes one look at Brother Go and asks Limu why his friend seems, well, a bit simple-minded. Limu quickly reminds him that this is actually the head of Yulong village, known to everyone as Brother Go. Byun-hai then opens the trunk to reveal the supplies he brought, a gas stove, pots, pans, and various kitchen essentials. After they unload everything, Limu tosses 2 packs of cigarettes to Brother Go and gives him a few instructions. He tells him he can go watch the others fish by the reservoir, provided he doesn't actually disturb their peace. He promises to call him when it's time to eat, and Brother Go, clutching his cigarettes with a grin, nods happily. We watch as he skips off toward the water, while Limu begins organizing the new supplies inside the old house. Once everything is in its place, he pulls out his phone to call sister-in-law Yulan, asking her to come over shortly. He wants her to bring her gear to the old house to cook. She suggests preparing a full fish feast for the anglers. The menu includes fried hemiculture, gudgeon, tofu stewed with bitterling, and steamed topmouth culture, all of which he heartily approves. Since the system-produced fish taste extraordinary, he knows these delicious meals will earn the fishing grounds a glowing reputation. Word of mouth will surely attract even more anglers. With the plan set, he heads back down to the reservoir. There, he spots Byun-hai already settled into a spot and fishing, and it occurs to him that the boy hasn't paid yet. He walks up and jokingly demands to know if he's really starting his session without paying the required fishing fee. Byun-hai grumbles in annoyance, asking Limu if he honestly has the heart to charge him after everything he just delivered. He points out all the supplies he bought today, but Limu simply scolds him with a playful, yet firm, tone. Limu scoffs, asking how he has the nerve to mention a conscience after the way he was tricked into buying rods at the shop. Back when he was addicted to fishing, he ended up buying a new rod from Byun-hai's shop almost every single week. Worse yet, Byun-hai even took him fishing during the off-season, which led to several of his rods being confiscated by the authorities. Hearing this, Byun-hai turns serious and agrees to pay the fee, though he's clearly not happy about it. He declares that he'll definitely catch something today, vowing to make Limu regret charging him once he sees the haul. Byun-hai pulls out his phone and scans the code to pay the 500 yuan fee, still muttering about his impending victory. Limu simply chuckles, telling Byun-hai that with his mediocre skills, there's really nothing to be afraid of. He challenges him to see who will come out on top today, while Byun-hai responds with a rather wicked grin. Byun-hai claims he has a secret weapon for a guaranteed win, leaving Limu wondering what on earth he could mean. To our surprise, the boy pulls an incense burner from his bag, lights 3 sticks, and carefully sets them inside. Then, with hands pressed together, Byun-hai begins a series of solemn, rhythmic chants to bless his fishing spot. He prays for the heavens to open and for his hands to be blessed, calling for smooth sailing as he begins his ritual. He continues through a long list of blessings, moving from 2 dragons playing with a pearl to 3 suns over a lucky land. He recites every step until he reaches the 10th, wishing for total perfection, before bowing 3 times to the burner. He finishes by muttering that the blessing is complete, hoping to catch 1,000 pounds of fish and bankrupt the owner. We see Limu standing there, completely dazed by the sheer absurdity of the performance unfolding before him. It seems the boy has turned to metaphysics to improve his catch, and naturally, every other angler is now staring at him. They look at him as if he's a complete fool. Even Brother Go is watching from a distance with intense curiosity. It's as if Brother Go has found a kindred spirit, and Limu feels that staying near Byun-hai might make him look just as crazy. He quickly turns to walk away, but even then, a curious angler can't help but run over to ask him what's going on. An angler asks if the guy performing the ritual is his friend, but Limu quickly shakes his head, claiming he has no idea who that is. Another fisherman, however, recognizes him as Byun-hai, the owner of the local Wanwang fishing gear shop. It seems no one expected Byun-hai's spiritual level to reach such heights, though Limu has his own thoughts on the matter. He figures Byun-hai should go all out and buy a Taoist robe and a wooden sword online to really complete the look. At least then he'd look the part. With things quiet for the moment and no new customers arriving, Limu decides to do his rounds. We see him begin patrolling the reservoir, noting that including Byun-hai, there are now 42 people fishing. During his walk, he eventually finds a female angler in a relatively secluded spot, wearing a sun hat and protective sleeves. Beside her, she has a smartphone set up on a tripod, clearly in the middle of a live stream. Limu strikes up a conversation, asking if she's a fishing streamer and how many followers she has managed to attract. She smiles and tells him she's fairly new, with only about 10,000 followers, which, to be honest, is quite a decent start. Limu nods in approval, but then he notices she is using standard powdered bait in her mixing bowl. He kindly warns her that the reservoir is full of small, aggressive fish like bitterlings and topmouth gudgeons. He suggests that if she's aiming for the larger topmouth coulters, she really ought to be using corn instead. Otherwise, the small fry will tear her powdered bait to pieces, but she simply laughs it off, saying she's happy to catch anything. Besides, her viewers are actually curious to see just how large this super small fish in this reservoir really are. She then asks if he wouldn't mind saying a quick hello to her audience, and naturally, Limu is happy to oblige. Even though she's still a rising influencer, she clearly has some decent traction, and a little promotion never hurts. So, he steps in front of the camera with a cheerful grin and gives the viewers a friendly wave. He introduces himself as the owner of the Yulong Village Reservoir in Dadong Town, explaining that this is a massive new natural fishing ground. He boasts that they have giant small fry species and wild topmouth coulters weighing over 20 pounds just waiting to be caught. He finishes by welcoming everyone to come and fish at his grounds, while the live stream audience of 98 people looks on. The chat erupts with comments, laughing at how this boss turned a friendly greeting into a blatant advertisement. To be honest, it was a bold move. Some viewers accuse him of bragging, doubting his claims about topmouth coulters weighing over 20 pounds. They claim no fishing ground in the country has such fish, and instead ask Limu if the streamer looks as beautiful in person. While they are chatting, two other anglers nearby manage to land massive coulters, both weighing over 10 pounds. Seeing such large fish, the other anglers grow excited, but Limu notices that lunchtime is fast approaching. He is about to give Gogu some instructions when he suddenly hears a loud splash followed by a cry. A woman's voice screams for help, shouting that a fish has pulled her right into the water. Limu turns toward the sound and sees the female streamer from before struggling in the reservoir. As she splashes about, he reacts instantly, grabbing a nearby landing net and extending it toward her. Fortunately, she is close enough to the shore for the net to reach, and he manages to pull her back to safety. Nearby fishermen rush over to watch the commotion, leaving the poor streamer feeling utterly embarrassed and soaking wet. With her clothes clinging to her, she awkwardly thanks Limu over and over for the rescue. After taking a moment to wring out her hair and fix her clothes, she looks back at the water and asks him a question. She asks if there are other types of fish in there, admitting that while she isn't an expert, she felt a massive weight. She claims the fish that pulled her in must have weighed at least 30 or 40 pounds, which leaves Limu stunned. He knows that the theoretical limit for a topmouth coulter is about 20 pounds. Anything larger would be a world miracle. She insists on her estimate, certain that the strength behind that pull was far beyond a normal fish. Limu remains skeptical, thinking it's more likely that her lack of technique made a smaller fish feel like a monster. After reminding her to stay safe, he spots Yang Yulan approaching, leading Gogu toward him. We see Yang Yulan bringing supplies to the reservoir's edge to start cooking, and by just afternoon, lunch is nearly ready. By now, the 33 anglers who arrived earliest have been at it for 5 hours, and almost all of them are catching fish. Suddenly, the female streamer from before lets out another sharp cry, shouting about a massive fish, drawing everyone's immediate attention. Everyone turns to look at once, witnessing the surface of the water churning with massive, violent splashes. People quickly pull out their phones to record the scene, swearing in disbelief that this one must weigh at least 20 pounds. They shout for the angler to stay steady, promising to record the catch as the beast finally begins to surface. The commotion is far more intense than the large coulter caught earlier that morning, and everyone warns him not to snap the line. They advise him to manage the tension carefully, calling for a backup rope while the female streamer watches on with bated breath. She cheers for the lean, tan man holding the rod, excited because his struggle has drawn over 1,000 viewers to her stream. Meanwhile, Limu realizes that if this man actually lands a 20-pound topmouth coulter, the implications would be massive. The Yulong Village Reservoir would become a national sensation, especially among the country's 100 million fishing enthusiasts. To be honest, the number of people who have actually seen a coulter over 20 pounds in person is incredibly small. Most anglers have only seen 10-pounders on the internet, but judging by the sheer violence of the movement in the water, and the partial silhouette emerging from the depths, it truly looks like it could be a record-breaking 20-pound monster. Even the person recording the video feels a surge of excitement, while the streamer nearby is absolutely thrilled by her growing audience. Her viewer count is rapidly approaching 1,000, providing the Yulong Village Reservoir with some truly incredible free publicity. The live chat on her screen is exploding with comments, mirroring the intense excitement of the fishermen gathered at the scene. Just as the lean man lets out a determined grunt, the coulter in the water lunges with a fresh burst of power. The fishing line, which had briefly gone quiet, begins to whistle through the air once again with a sharp, rhythmic sound. It is a beautiful sound to any fisherman, and it leaves everyone present feeling completely invigorated by the spectacle. We see the crowd's eyes lighting up with envy, as if they want to jump in and take over, while Limu watches from the sidelines. He observes the lean man's technique, which seems remarkably similar to the style used by the legendary fishing master, Hua Lao. It is the high-intensity hold method, where one avoids casting too far and simply grips the rod tight once the fish is hooked. The goal is to let the fish exhaust itself, though holding steady is a bit of a simplification. To be honest, it is much harder than it looks. When the fish lunges side to side, the angler must move along the bank, a technique with much in common with the figure-8 method. In the end, all great fishing techniques share a certain fundamental logic, regardless of the name they are given. Whether it is Old Chui's famous white rod style or Li Damao's battlefield maneuver, they all aim for the same result. After 10 minutes of intense struggle, the lean man finally gains the upper hand and begins to dictate the pace. He stabilizes his stance and slowly backs away from the water, bringing the exhausted fish toward the muddy bank. As the massive silhouette of the topmouth coulter becomes clear, the surrounding anglers can't help but shout in pure disbelief. They cheer at the sheer size of the beast, calling urgently for someone to step forward and help with the landing net. However, netting a fish of this size is a heavy responsibility. If it escapes, the angler would likely never forgive the mistake. Someone asks Li Mu to help, but he is busy recording the moment, and that is when Bai Yunhai steps forward to volunteer. He emerges from the crowd with a look of quiet confidence, picking up the lean man's oversized landing net. Under the watchful eyes of dozens of cameras, Bai Yunhai approaches the water's edge and tells the angler he is ready. He instructs the man to wait for his signal before loosening the tension, and the lean man nods in silent agreement. They wait a few more moments to be absolutely sure, until the lean man decides the fish has finally given up the fight. He gives the command, and Bai Yunhai moves with the precision of a professional to scoop the monster from the water. It turns out Bai Yunhai's skills are just as impressive as his rugged appearance, as the massive head and body slide into the net. Immediately, the crowd surges forward to see the prize, with Li Mu and the female streamer following close behind. The lean, tan man quickly sets down his rod and rushes over, eager to help finish the job himself. He and Bai Yunhai grab the iron ring of the landing net together, lifting the massive fish out of the water. But then, something no one expected happens. The bottom of the net suddenly gives way under the weight of the giant topmouth coulter. With a single powerful thrash, the beast slips straight through the hole in the net and falls back into the depths. The fish vanishes in the blink of an eye, and the lean man instinctively reaches for the main line, which is still unhooked. It is a dangerous move that could easily slice his hand, but it is useless anyway. The hook has already pulled free. In that moment, a terrifying silence falls over the crowd as Bai Yunhai and the lean man stand there, still clutching the empty net. They look up at each other in stunned disbelief, and for 10 long seconds, every single person watching is frozen in place. It is as if the entire world has been put on pause, with everyone staring blankly at the two men by the water's edge. Li Mu is the first to snap out of it, though he feels like he might faint. He can't help but wonder what kind of cheap net the man was using. A 20-pound topmouth coulter was practically on the shore already. How could it possibly escape like that? As soon as he speaks, the spell is broken, and a collective groan of pure agony erupts from all the anglers present. Tears nearly well up in the lean man's eyes. He explains that because his rods were so expensive, he tried to save money on a generic net. To be honest, that was a very costly mistake, and no words of comfort can truly soothe the man's broken heart right now. And so, Li Mu returns to the business of collecting fish. At 100 yuan an hour, a 5-hour session starts at 500 yuan. The buyback rate is 3 yuan per pound, and anglers can only take home a small portion of their catch. The other fishermen offer a moment of sympathy for the one that got away, but they soon return to their own lines. As for the total profit from this wave, Li Mu decides he will wait until the end of the day to do the final math. Once he finishes processing the catch for all 33 anglers, he finds that Yang Yulan has finished preparing the meal. We see him calling everyone over to line up for food, and the atmosphere quickly turns lively as the feast begins. As the crowd gathers, they find the sight of the charming Yang Yulan quite pleasant, but it is the aroma of the food that truly captures their attention. One by one, the anglers begin to feel their spirits lift as they prepare to taste the day's fresh catch. We see that Yang Yulan's graceful presence is a comfort to them all, yet the real surprise comes the moment they finally taste the fish. Their eyes light up in instant delight. They can hardly believe the quality of the fried topmouth coulter and the local specialty, the patihu. One man remarks that while he has had fried fish before, this is his first time experiencing a patihu, so perfectly crispy on the outside and tender within. The flavors of the fried fish are simply incredible, but the steamed coulter is the true star, a taste that only genuine wild-caught fish can provide. One angler notes that the meal alone is worth 100 yuan, and having made 300 back from his catch, he feels he has finally broken even today. A group of them gathers around Yang Yulan, complimenting her warmly and telling her that her cooking is absolutely divine. She is clearly satisfied by the praise, and being called sister by the younger men makes her even happier as she tells them all to keep eating. She promises that once everyone has been served, any leftovers will be distributed, though she reminds them not to leave their trash lying around. She asks them to bring their used bowls to her for easy cleanup, while Li Mu notices that a single serving might not be enough for Go-Go. He tells the man that if he is still hungry after finishing his bowl, he should go back to Aunt Yulan for a second helping. Go-Go looks up with a grateful smile, while nearby, Bai Yunhai sits on a rock, eating his meal while scrolling through videos on his phone. Bai Yunhai looks up and asks Li Mu whether the secret to this success is Yulan's cooking or the exceptional quality of the fish from this water. Li Mu simply offers a knowing smile, while Bai Yunhai decides right then that he must take some home for his wife and children to taste. The flavor is truly unmatched, and even the lean, tan man is eating with the crowd on the other side, though his heart isn't quite in it. While everyone else finds the food delicious and fragrant, the lean man finds that the meal tastes a bit bitter today. He is still haunted by the memory of that massive fish escaping, which, to be honest, makes even the finest delicacy taste like ash. A little later, once the anglers have finished their feast, they return to their fishing spots to continue the struggle against the depths. As Go-Ge helps Yang Yulan clean up the area, Li Mu is surprised to see that the anglers who had already finished their sessions are not leaving. We see that even after finishing their meal, barely 5 people have actually left, while everyone else seems to have no intention of moving. It makes one wonder if they are waiting for the evening bite, or if they simply want to linger and perhaps try their luck at scoring a free dinner. As Bai Yunhai returns to his fishing spot, Li Mu finds a place to sit and soon comes across a new video posted by Feng Ying. The content of Feng Ying's latest video is centered entirely on the Yulong village reservoir, starting from their very first encounter back in town. It follows their conversation, the return to the village, and the trek to the back mountain bay, where Feng Ying initially felt like he was being scammed. There are plenty of complaints at first, but then the footage shows the sudden appearance of massive topmouth coulter and patahu before the video ends. The overall production is quite impressive, with the editing making the experience feel even more streamlined than reality, so Li Mu checks the comments. The section is flooded with disbelief, with viewers shocked that coulter and patahu could actually grow to such an incredible size. The praise is overwhelming, though naturally, some skeptics are already claiming that the reservoir must not contain any other types of fish. Given the video's current popularity, it will surely bring Feng Ying a massive boost in traffic and a significant number of new followers. However, Li Mu notices something frustrating. Not once in the entire video does the man actually mention the name of the Yulong village reservoir. He remembers intentionally mentioning the name several times in front of the lens, but it seems every single instance was cut during post-production. Taking matters into his own hands, he updates his profile to identify himself as the owner of the Yulong village reservoir and marks the exact location. He specifies Dadong Town in Luyan County, and then leaves a comment directly under Feng Ying's video to introduce himself to the viewers. He writes that he is the owner of the reservoir featured in the video, boasting not only of the beautiful natural scenery, but also the experience. He describes the comfortable fishing environment and the presence of various wild giants, including those massive coulter and patahu. He notes that the patahu are just the tip of the iceberg, mentioning that an angler had caught a 20-pound coulter just that very day. He invites everyone to watch his own videos and welcomes them to come fish at the reservoir, hoping to capitalize on the sudden attention. After that, he uploads the spare footage he recorded of the Black Hand brother, feeling certain that the Yulong village reservoir is about to trend. With everything set in motion, he begins to reflect on everything that has happened up until this moment. We see that 33 people have already finished fishing, a number that far exceeds the system's updated goal of 20 customers. This means he has earned another chance to upgrade, and he is just about to check in with the system to see the rewards. But then, Bai Yunhai comes scurrying back over, telling Li Mu that while the fishing grounds are clearly doing well now, he should consider if he wants to make even more money, prompting Li Mu to look at him and ask what he's up to. He wonders what kind of scheme the boy has cooked up this time, and Bai Yunhai simply chuckles, explaining that since he owns a tackle shop, he expects the reservoir to be crowded every day and wants to set up a dedicated stall right there on the property. His plan is to bring in all sorts of gear to sell, and after covering the wholesale costs, they would split the profits 50-50. It sounds like a tempting offer. After all, Li Mu wouldn't have to provide anything and would essentially be getting free money. Upon hearing this, Li Mu gives it some serious thought, realizing the idea is worth considering, though he bristles at the idea of it being free. He is the one providing the foot traffic and his own growing popularity, so he wonders why he couldn't just source the goods from manufacturers himself. There is no reason to let Bai Yunhai walk away with half the profit for nothing, so he looks at his friend and lays down his terms. He tells him that a partnership is possible, but it must be a 70-30 split, with Li Mu taking the larger share of 7. Otherwise, he'll simply go to the suppliers directly, a move that leaves Bai Yunhai complaining that Li Mu's heart has turned far too black. Bai Yunhai tries to haggle for a 60-40 split, but Li Mu doesn't give him the chance and simply turns to walk away. In this day and age, the one who controls the channel and the traffic is the one in charge, and Bai Yunhai isn't even the manufacturer. He is only offering a bit of labor and coordination, which hardly justifies taking 40 or 50% of the earnings. If they weren't friends, Li Mu would have just done it himself, knowing that the number of anglers visiting the reservoir will only increase. Beyond just bait, there is a constant demand for replacements when rods break or lines snap, and selling those items could be quite lucrative. The retail profit margins on fishing gear and bait are already significant to begin with, which makes the prospect even more attractive. Furthermore, if sold directly at the Yulong village reservoir, the prices could even be set slightly higher than those in the city shops. Seeing that Li Mu is truly walking away, Bai Yunhai immediately lunges forward to grab him, pleading for his big brother to accept the 70-30 split. He adds one small condition. He wants to be allowed to fish here for free from now on. To be honest, it's a fair trade. Li Mu sees that the boy is being sincere this time and gives a firm nod of agreement. Starting a business really is an exhilarating feeling. It is especially exciting when one has a cheat code like the system. Now, he has another income stream while also providing a service for future anglers. He has managed to add convenience for his customers without having to lift a finger himself, allowing him to simply sit back and wait for the profits. It's a wonderful feeling, but he knows that turning the Yulong Village Reservoir into a national holy land for fishing will require a massive investment. While he might not need 100 million just yet, he estimates that he will need at least 10 or 20 million to realize his vision. With the future in mind, he asks Bai Yunhai exactly when he plans to start bringing the inventory over to the reservoir. Bai Yunhai thinks for a moment and promises to arrange everything tonight so he can bring the first batch early tomorrow morning. Li Mu nods and suggests that he should also sell drinks and snacks, offering a more generous 50-50 split for that specific category. However, he insists that the accounts must be settled daily. Bai Yunhai can't help but think that Li Mu has become quite the cunning businessman. He had hoped Li Mu would overlook the smaller profits from beverages, but our protagonist has clearly thought of everything already. After discussing a few more business details, Bai Yunhai returns to his fishing. All things considered, he is actually in a very good mood. He has gained a high-quality sales channel without much extra effort, which, for him, feels like finding money on the ground. He looks forward to the earnings from the reservoir, but his excitement stems from a much more personal motivation. Being away from his wife's watchful eye means he finally has a way to build up his own secret stash of cash, which, naturally, is his real goal. With his eyes practically glowing at the thought, he aggressively tosses several scoops of bait into the water, feeling like a high roller. With the deal settled, Li Mu finds a quiet spot to check back in with the system and see what comes next. He asks if the new upgrade opportunity is ready, and the system immediately confirms that it is indeed available for its host. He considers his options. While the variety of fish in the reservoir is decent for now, the actual surface area of the water is still quite limited. Li Mu decides the area is still a bit too small, so he immediately instructs the system to upgrade the reservoir's water surface area. The system responds instantly, confirming that the upgrade is in progress and asking the host to wait for its completion. At the same time, a new fishing task is issued. The host must now invite people to fish at the Yulong Village Reservoir. The price is set at 100 yuan per hour, with a minimum requirement of 5 hours per session. Once 40 people have paid and started fishing, the host will earn another opportunity to upgrade the fishing grounds. Li Mu is quite pleased with this new business task. This time, the system didn't raise the price, but simply increased the required headcount. With only 40 paying customers needed for an upgrade, he estimates he might even finish this task by tonight. He is relieved the system didn't hike the prices again. After all, raising them 2 days in a row would be bad for business. He plans to use the upgrade opportunity earned tonight to continue improving the variety of fish species available. For now, focusing on expanding the water surface area is definitely the right move for the reservoir's growth. The current area of 28.8 mu isn't exactly massive, but this upgrade will significantly change that scale. There is another benefit. As the water area grows, the number of fish the system generates will increase proportionally. A larger space means many more fish than a small pond could hold, which means he's going to be busy for a while. We see that the previous group of anglers are reaching the end of their allotted time one by one. Li Mu calls over Brother Go to help process the fish returns. Half an hour later, only Bai Yunhai is still fishing. Most of the other anglers haven't actually left yet. Instead, they've gathered around to watch the remaining action. They are all crowding around Bai Yunhai now, watching him fish with such intensity that it creates quite a spectacle. To an outsider, it might look like Bai Yunhai is some kind of famous internet celebrity. Even the female streamer's time is up. She waves goodbye, promising to return next time, and Li Mu offers a polite smile, telling her she's always welcome. However, the unlucky man who lost the big catch earlier hasn't left. Even though that 20-pound giant escaped, he's still lingering. Even so, when it came time to return the fish, he had to admit that the man's skill was truly impressive. He is currently standing among the crowd surrounding Bai Yunhai, and while he doesn't look exactly happy, he seems to have recovered quite a bit from his earlier loss. Li Mu then hops into his third-hand Mercedes. He heads straight for Dadong Town to handle a simple errand, buying an inflatable boat. He also picks up several life jackets, because as the water area expands, he needs to be ready for any accidental falls. The inflatable boat has another practical use as well. It will be perfect for clearing debris off the water's surface. After securing the boat, he visits a local shop to have official WeChat and Alipay payment QR codes made. Before leaving town, he calls Sister Yulan and picks up a large supply of cooking essentials like oil, rice, and salt for her. And so, by the time he returns to the Yulong Village Reservoir, carrying the heavy inflatable boat on his shoulders, Brother Go proves his worth immediately, rushing over to take the heavy load from Li Mu's arms. Li Mu then presents a special gift, a brand new set of clothes, including a shirt, pants, shoes, and socks. He tells Brother Go to go home, take a bath, and wear the new outfit when he returns tomorrow morning. From now on, he is expected to show up at dawn every day. Brother Go simply smiles, clutching his new clothes happily. After that, Li Mu spends some time inflating the boat and gets it properly positioned along the riverbank. The anglers quickly fill him in, explaining that someone just caught a massive coulter fish that nearly hit 20 pounds. It measured 1.46 meters and weighed 18.8 pounds, and luckily, it's still in the net. Unable to resist the urge to show off, Bai Yunhai immediately steps down from his fishing spot to pull the net up. Inside the net sits that single, massive prize, the 1.46-meter-long giant. Seeing it up close, it's clear that the unlucky brother, lost earlier really must have been over 20 pounds. Bai Yunhai looks at Li Mu with a triumphant laugh, announcing his intention to take this impressive catch home later. He plans to hang it from the back of his car, drive all the way to the county seat, and circle the riverfront road 3 times. He asks Li Mu if he has any opinions to share. To be honest, seeing such a massive coulter fish is quite a shock. But Li Mu simply reminds Bai Yunhai of the rules. He is only allowed to take home 1 fish under 10 pounds. Besides, he hasn't even charged him for the later fishing fees yet. He tells the boy to put the fish back into the reservoir immediately. If it dies on his watch, he won't be able to afford the compensation. At those words, everyone except Bai Yunhai starts laughing. The crowd joins in to help, and in no time at all, they have the giant coulter out of the net and back into the water. Watching the ripples fade, Bai Yunhai feels utterly defeated. Others had already taken photos of the catch, but he hadn't yet. He could ask others for their photos, of course, but it wouldn't have the same impact as holding the massive fish in his own arms. The growing crowd brings a lively energy to the scene, and the atmosphere is excellent. More people are already lining up to pay and start fishing. And so, Li Mu becomes busy once again. One after another, people begin handing over their fees to secure a spot. A little later, even more anglers begin to arrive. Each newcomer is clearly filled with a sense of excitement and high expectations. For the next few hours, Li Mu's time is spent entirely on collecting fees and welcoming new guests until 7 in the evening. As dusk begins to settle, we see Yang Ilan starting to cook dinner by the reservoir. By this point, the numbers are impressive. There are now roughly 80 anglers fishing at the reservoir, with another 10 or so people watching from the sidelines. These are mostly people who rushed over after work to check things out, and they will likely start fishing before 8 o'clock. Li Mu watches with a bit of excitement, wondering if the nighttime crowd will push the total number of anglers past 100. With about 80 people currently paying 500 yuan each, he has already collected around 40,000 yuan in fees. It is a staggering amount of money for a single day, though, to be perfectly honest, the actual net income isn't quite that high yet. We must remember that these 80 people haven't returned any fish yet. Individually, it might be little, but collectively, it adds up. So, he decides to wait until everyone has left for the night before calculating the exact total income for the day. Li Mu wonders exactly how much he's earned today. He tells Sister Yulan she's worked hard, and it looks like they'll hit 100 guests tonight. He suggests she ask Brother Go for help if needed, but Yang Yulan doesn't mind the workload at all, telling Li Mu it's no trouble. She jokes that working hard makes her feel better about taking his salary, then suggests they arrange dinner in 2 shifts once the first batch is ready. She'll have Brother Go inform him when it's time. Li Mu nods, but deep down, he's already calculating his next move. Even with Go's help, he realizes he'll need to hire more staff soon. After that, he continues his patrol around the reservoir, primarily to remind the anglers about safety. Secondly, he asks everyone to mind their trash, and thirdly, he keeps an eye out for any illegal fishing gear. These patrols are quite important, really. As he walks, he greets the familiar faces and hands out cigarettes, stopping to chat with regulars like Uncle Brother, Black Beast, and several others who call out to him. Both Uncle Brother and Black Beast are already busy with their lines. However, as he completes his circuit, we see him notice something slightly off. Out of the 80 people currently fishing, aside from a few wealthy, eccentric types hoping for super bleak, chin-chin, or gudgeon fish, the majority are using corn to target coulter. Yet, as they create their dynamic bait zones, he notices that nearly half of them are using small gravel stones. Most of them were part of that same group from this morning. Good grief. He remembers that this particular trick was actually invented by Black Beast. On the surface, using stones for baiting doesn't seem like a problem. After all, just because someone uses gravel doesn't mean they'll be skilled enough to actually outsmart him and clear out the pond. In the world of fishing, no matter what you're catching or how you do it, success still comes down to skill, luck, and choosing the right spot. But after finishing his round, he realizes this is becoming a serious issue. If things continue this way, and every future coulter fisherman starts throwing gravel into the water, they'll eventually fill his entire reservoir to the brim. It's like a modern-day version of the old man moving the mountain, only with pebbles. Yet, banning stones entirely doesn't feel right either. It seems his only option is to quickly introduce other high-quality fish species to distract these mountain-moving anglers and reduce the gravel dumping. Just as he begins to grasp the true severity of the situation, an angler approaches him to complain, asking the boss to step in and handle things. Li Mu immediately asks the angler what's wrong, and the man points toward a rather large fellow sitting not far away. "Look at that big guy," the angler complains. "The rest of us prep our gravel beforehand, but he brought his stones right here. He's smashing them right by the water. The noise is so loud the fish have all fled. I haven't had a single bite." The man speaking is none other than Uncle Brother, one of the pair who spent the entire previous night fishing with us. He had arrived early this afternoon and quickly learned the trick of using crushed stones to create a baiting zone. Limu looks over at the other man, a heavy-set fellow standing about 6 feet tall. This big guy had somehow lugged over a massive rock and was hammering away at it incessantly. The noise was indeed excessive, clearly disturbing the peace of the reservoir. It was obviously ruining the chances for everyone nearby, but seeing the man's intimidating size, they were all too afraid to speak up. Only when the boss arrived did Uncle Brother find his courage. Limu quickly reassures him, promising to handle the situation. "All right, I'll go talk to him," he says. He approaches the big man and asks him politely to stop the hammering. "The noise is far too loud, brother. You're scaring all the fish away, which isn't fair to the other anglers around you. Besides, if you keep this up, you won't catch anything yourself." The big man looks up, his massive face momentarily blank with surprise. Then, a wide smile breaks across his face. "Oh, I'll stop then. I just saw everyone else using stones and tried to copy them. Since it's bothering people, I'll just stick to corn." Limu nods, satisfied. But as he looks at the man's fair, clean complexion, he can't help but ask another question. "Brother, looking at your skin, I take it you're quite new to fishing." The big man shakes his head, claiming he's been at it for several months and is no longer a novice. Limu just muses to himself that a few months of experience is the very definition of a novice. It seems this fellow is destined to lose to the house today. Suddenly, the big man stands up with a smile and starts walking toward Uncle Brother. Limu pauses, feeling a bit concerned. He assumes the big guy is heading over to start an argument, but to his surprise, the man looks incredibly humble. He pulls out a pack of premium cigarettes to offer Uncle Brother, apologizing profusely for the noise he was making earlier. "I'm sorry for disturbing your fishing," the big man says, leaving Uncle Brother momentarily stunned as he accepts the cigarette. After that, the man returns to Limu and offers him one as well, saying, "Boss, please, have a smoke. I'm still quite new to this. There is still so much I don't understand, so I'll have to trouble you for some guidance in the future." Limu accepts the gesture. The big fellow immediately pulls out a lighter to offer a flame. Limu takes a puff, noting the premium quality of the tobacco. It certainly tastes expensive. To be honest, he hadn't expected this giant of a man to be so socially adept. Limu decides to chat a bit more. "Brother, how old are you? Do you live in the county seat?" The big man nods and explains that he is only 24 years old. He does indeed live in town and only came to this fishing ground after seeing a post about it on his social media feed. The big man lights a cigarette for himself as well. "Boss," he asks, "where exactly do you buy the coulter fish for this reservoir? Not only are they wild, but they're massive. I've even heard that in this reservoir, even the small fry like the hemicoulter are shockingly large." Amused by the question, Limu teases the big man, asking if he's ever read those stories about people finding magical systems. "I have a golden finger system," he jokes. "I just conjure these fish out of thin air." It was a joke, of course. The big man gives an awkward laugh, clearly not believing a word of it. They chat for a few more minutes about nothing in particular. When more anglers begin to arrive, Limu finally takes his leave. Only then does the big man sit back down on his tackle box. He pulls out his phone and opens WeChat to send a message. "Dad, I told you," he types. "The boss isn't going to tell me. If you were in his shoes and had such an incredible supplier, would you really just give that information away?" A reply comes back almost instantly. "Why are you only messaging me now? Weren't you supposed to be there ages ago?" "There were too many people around when I arrived," the big man replies. "I couldn't just ask. The boss was busy, and I only just got a chance." On the other end of the line, the father snorts in frustration, scolding his son for only caring about fishing instead of getting things done. He orders his son to come home immediately, but the big man isn't ready to leave his spot by the water just yet. "I've only been fishing for a little while. I'm not coming back." This sends his father into a rage, calling him a completely disobedient son. His father continues to fume, pointing out that they have their own fishing grounds at home, and he was sent there for business, not to refuse to return. The big man, whom we'll call Pongzi, immediately retorts by asking his father if their family's fishing spot could even begin to compare to this one. Pongzi simply switches off his phone and mutters to himself with excitement that he plans to stay here all night. His goal is to catch a 20-pound coulter, and meanwhile, Limu finishes welcoming about 10 more anglers to the reservoir. By then, Yang Yulan has finished preparing the first batch of dinner and asks Goer to go and call the fishermen to come and eat. Limu takes over the ladle to serve the food himself, while Yang Yulan heads back to the kitchen to start on the second batch of meals. The menu remains the same as it was at lunch, and the anglers who arrived in the afternoon or evening are pleasantly surprised to find food provided. It is a welcome sight for them, to be sure. Once the first group is served, the atmosphere around the reservoir becomes quite lively. Those tasting the food for the first time are just as astonished as the lunch crowd was, unable to stop praising the incredible flavors. Among them, the social butterfly Pongzi is the most vocal, excitedly telling Limu after finishing his meal just how much he enjoyed it. "Boss, this fish is delicious," he says. "I think you should charge at least 50 yuan per person for a meal like this." Limu can't help but laugh at the suggestion, telling Pongzi that despite his large size, such an idea might get him in trouble. He jokes that the others might team up to beat him up for suggesting a price hike, and the surrounding anglers all break into laughter. Even Yang Yulan, busy as she is, smiles and remarks that the young man has a wonderful, cheerful personality and a very healthy complexion. The atmosphere at dinner is excellent, feeling more like a festive gathering than a simple meal by a reservoir. Aside from the mood Pongzi created, many of the anglers are busy exchanging fishing tips and stories while they eat. We see the thin, tan man from earlier being surrounded by others. It seems his story has traveled remarkably fast through the group. Even the newcomers who only arrived this evening have somehow heard all about his experiences from earlier in the day. The poor man's heartbreaking tale has become the talk of the camp, leaving him with nothing to do but offer a forced, awkward smile. After the meal is over, Bai Yunhai comes over to say his goodbyes to Li Mu, explaining that it is finally time for him to head home. Before leaving, he makes sure to take a 3-pound coulter fish with him, claiming he wants his wife to taste the quality for herself. Li Mu gives Bai Yunhai a final reminder to bring plenty of supplies to sell tomorrow, especially bait and other essentials. He emphasizes stocking up on consumables, large landing nets, and fish guards, to which Bai Yunhai nods in full agreement. After that, the merchant drives off, just as the first wave of anglers finishes their dinner and heads back to the water. It is then time for the second group to eat, and by the time they finish, night has fallen and it is just past 8 o'clock. Li Mu welcomes about 10 more anglers during this time, though he suspects that no more newcomers will be arriving tonight. Even if more were to show up, he decides he wouldn't accept them, as he has no intention of staying open all night. This is partly because the system is scheduled to upgrade the water area late tonight, and partly due to management logic. He knows a fishing ground shouldn't have people casting lines 24 hours a day, every single day, without a break. Constantly catching and releasing fish makes them wary and harder to catch, and besides, he simply doesn't have enough staff yet. Furthermore, overnight fishing carries higher safety risks than during the day, so he begins helping Yang Yulan clear the tables. Once Yang Yulan heads back to the village, Li Mu continues his rounds around the reservoir, with Goer following closely at his heels. Realizing the man needs his rest, Li Mu instructs Goer to go home and sleep, telling him to return early the next morning. He also reminds him to wear the new clothes he bought for him, but Goer just stands there with a silly, honest grin. Instead of leaving, Goer pulls out the cigarettes Li Mu gave him and offers one to the boss, which catches Li Mu by surprise. Li Mu laughs, impressed that Goer has learned the social grace of offering a smoke, promising to treat him to a premium brand next time. He asks Goer if he even knows what a premium cigarette is, but the man just chuckles as they share a quiet smoke together. Only after the cigarette is finished does Goer finally depart, but almost immediately, an anxious angler rushes up to Li Mu. The man is in a frantic hurry, begging Li Mu to take his money so he can go grab his gear from the car and start fishing. Li Mu doesn't take the money, however, and instead asks where he's been all day, explaining that the reservoir closes at 1 in the morning. We recognize this man. He's the one who showed up after 6 o'clock before, only to watch without casting a line, but now he's suddenly eager to fish. The angler, looking quite anxious, tells Li Mu to wait for him to grab his gear, estimating he'll be set up by 9. He proposes a deal. Since he'll only have 4 hours until the 1 o'clock closing, he'll pay 400 yuan for the time. Seeing the man's excitement, Li Mu holds up the payment code hanging around his neck and asks what brought on this sudden change of heart. He points out that previously, the man was content just to observe and wonders why he's so desperate to start now. While scanning the code to pay, the angler explains that the thin, dark-skinned man who lost a big one this morning is at it again. That same man has just hooked another cult of fish over 20 pounds, and this time, he actually managed to land it. The angler urges Li Mu to go see for himself, and once the payment is settled, Li Mu follows him toward the commotion. As they approach the spot where the dark-skinned man is stationed, we see a crowd has already gathered, their flashlights cutting through the dark. Pushing through the group, Li Mu sees it is indeed the same man from before, whose face is now glowing with pure triumph. He is cradling a massive, truly gargantuan coulter fish in his arms while everyone around him cheers and snaps photos. Li Mu is genuinely impressed, telling the man that landing such a beast is an incredible feat that most people never achieve. He notes that while others struggle to find even one fish over 20 pounds, this man has managed to hook 2 in a single day. The man is as happy as a child, modestly telling the boss that the one from this morning didn't count since it got away. He declares that this one is the real deal, though he can't help but comment on just how heavy the creature is. He even offers to let Li Mu hold the fish, but instead of taking it, Li Mu asks if he has measured and weighed the catch yet. The man confidently reports the stats. The fish is 157 centimeters long and weighs nearly 25 pounds. At that moment, the surrounding anglers begin to chime in, playfully pressuring the boss for a celebration. They suggest that since someone caught such a massive fish, Li Mu should offer a prize, or perhaps a small bonus to mark the occasion. They argue that sharing photos of this monster catch will surely bring even more customers to the reservoir, which is a fair point, really. Li Mu simply smiles, not immediately responding to the talk of a bonus, and instead steps forward to admire the massive cult of fish. The creature's mouth is large enough to fit a human fist, and we can tell our dark-skinned friend is finally feeling quite satisfied. While the reservoir has been upgraded to hold fish over 20 pounds, the system's rules for fish species upgrades are quite specific. The larger the fish, the rarer they are, and with so many people fishing today, the odds were certainly against such a catch. Not a single other person managed to land anything over 20 pounds, yet this dark-skinned man hooked 2 in a single day. This suggests the man truly has some skill, and soon, once everyone finishes their photos, the excitement begins to settle. Limu has the man release the fish back into the reservoir, while privately considering if he should start some kind of special event. He stands to the side, lost in thought for a moment, and quickly devises a very suitable and concrete plan for the future. It is a simple enough idea. He will establish an official Yulong Village Reservoir Big Catch leaderboard to track the best anglers. The rankings will be categorized by species, with a minimum weight requirement for each type of fish to qualify for the list. Every Monday, the rankings will be settled, and the top anglers for each species will receive a well-deserved prize. When he shares this idea with the group, the gathered anglers are full of praise, clearly loving the competitive spirit of it. Limu realizes that although the Yulong Village Reservoir has only been open for a couple of days, it is already creating legends. Local fishing circles are already buzzing with stories of star characters, like our dark-skinned friend who started it all. Landing 2 20-pound coulters in one day while using the shredded bait method is sure to make him a local celebrity. His name will undoubtedly spread through the fishing community of Luyan County, followed closely by the names of other successful anglers. Then there are those who manage to land fish over 10 pounds, which is still a respectable achievement in its own right. While they might not be as legendary as the dark-skinned man, they've proven their strength, including an angler named Bai Yunhai. Earlier that afternoon, Bai Yunhai had landed a coulter weighing over 18 pounds, a feat that shouldn't be overlooked. In terms of weight and size, he is currently second only to our dark-skinned champion, along with that other older gentleman. Last night, he not only made a heroic dive into the water, but also landed a massive coulter alongside the shorter of the two brothers. Videos of that catch had already been shared in the fishing groups, which is why so many people showed up today. They knew exactly what to expect. It was still early in the evening, and with so many lines in the water, we were bound to see more 10-pounders appearing soon. As for anything over 20 pounds, that was less certain, and yet, our dark-skinned friend managed to hook another 20-pounder anyway. Once again, he successfully brought it to shore, and the news of his luck spread through the fishing grounds like wildfire. The other anglers grew even more excited, especially a large man who had arrived earlier. He was now more confident than ever in his own goals. Limu continued his patrol, all while mentally refining the details for his new Yulong Village Reservoir leaderboard. He soon found himself standing behind another angler who had just hooked something substantial. Judging by the way the fish was fighting, Limu estimated it was at least 5 pounds, but he also sensed something else. He was certain the line would snap or the hook would slip, and just as the thought crossed his mind, the line snapped with a sharp crack. The excitement on the man's face vanished instantly, deflating like a popped balloon, so Limu stepped forward to offer a bit of advice. He told the man that with his current technique, he'd be lucky to make back even a fraction of his 500 yuan entry fee. The angler sighed deeply, lamenting that his line was too thin and that his current setup simply wasn't up to the task. Limu gave a small chuckle, noting that for the fish he was targeting, the line wasn't actually the problem. He pointed out that even with a 7-meter rod and that specific line combo, he could have landed the fish with enough time. When the fish lunged into the distance, the line only snapped because the man failed to take a few steps forward to ease the tension. Hearing this, the angler suddenly perked up, eagerly asking the boss to explain exactly what he meant. Limu patiently explained that unless it's a true monster, a fish's strongest surge only lasts for a brief moment. If he had followed the fish's pull by stepping forward and then tilting the rod to the side, the fish wouldn't have stood a chance. The angler looked at Limu with pure admiration, clearly impressed by the boss's deep understanding of the craft. "Boss, you explained that so perfectly, I finally get it," the angler said, and Limu gave him an encouraging nod. He told the man to keep at it, but the angler quickly stopped him to ask if he had any fishing line sets for sale. He wanted to switch to a heavier set for a bit of extra security, and besides, he had completely run out of leader lines. Limu shook his head, explaining those wouldn't be available until tomorrow, and suggested he ask the other fishermen for any spares. To be honest, Limu actually had some sets on hand, but he simply didn't feel like walking back to get them. We see him continue his patrol until he reaches the pale, stout man, arriving just as the man hooks a fish. But the moment he raised his rod, the fish escaped, and the man looked up to see the boss standing there. He cried out that his heart was breaking and begged Limu to tell him why every fish he hooked kept getting away. At this rate, he feared his goal of catching a 20-pounder tonight was becoming an impossible dream. Limu couldn't help but laugh out loud. The man was clearly obsessed with the sport despite his lack of skill. The idea of him catching a 20-pound coulter seemed like pure fantasy, and the man noticed the boss's mocking smile. He quickly pulled out a high-end cigarette to bribe him into silence, and Limu took it with a grin. After taking a deep drag, Limu began to explain that the man's failure came down to 2 specific issues. First, he needed to be more decisive when the fish bit, a skill that, unfortunately, only comes with practice. The second issue was his lack of stability, which was the main reason that last fish managed to shake the hook. Limu pointed out that when he struck, the natural tension between the line and the rod caused a sudden recoil. That bounce was a clear sign of instability. In a proper strike, the rod should remain firm once it takes the weight. Even with the flexibility of the gear, the rod should lock into place the moment the hook sets in the fish's mouth. If the rod bounces back and the timing of the strike is off, the result is exactly what we just witnessed. The hook simply slips out and the fish swims away free. A simple lesson, but one the man desperately needed to hear. The stout man's eyes lit up with sudden clarity as he thanked Limu, his face flushed with genuine excitement. He praised the boss for being so generous, noting that other fishery owners often refuse to teach anyone anything. They usually fear that the anglers might catch too much, but Limu simply told him to stop with the flattery. To be honest, he was mostly worried about these novices injuring his fish, even if the high prices usually kept beginners away. But with such incredible resources, the crowd had grown so large that the number of inexperienced fishers was actually quite high. Most of them were wealthy, and while their money was easier to earn, they certainly caused more wear and tear on the stock. There was another burden, too, the sheer obsession of a beginner, which can be a truly terrifying thing to witness. Their addiction to the sport is often far more intense than that of a veteran. Meanwhile, Limu continued his patrol. He soon spotted the older man from the previous night, who was completely soaked, and Limu asked if he'd fallen in again. The man sighed as he changed his clothes, admitting that he had, a level of dedication that left Limu quite speechless. The man was clearly pushing himself too hard, so after a quick safety warning, Limu found a place to sit down. It wasn't long before he had fully refined his idea for the Yulong Village Reservoir Big Fish Leaderboard, categorized by species. Since the only major fish in the reservoir currently were coulters, he decided to start with a single coulter leaderboard. The minimum requirement to enter the rankings would be a catch weighing at least 10 pounds. Anything less simply wouldn't count. The rankings would reset every Monday morning, with rewards distributed to the top 10 anglers from the previous week. The top 3 would receive direct cash prizes, though the exact amounts would have to wait until he calculated today's profits. 4th place would be rewarded with 3 days of free fishing, while 5th place would earn a single free day. As for those ranking from 6th to 10th, they would each receive 5 hours of free fishing time for their efforts. This was just the beginning. As more species were introduced, each would have its own separate leaderboard and rewards. Every category would offer the same prizes for the top 10, but as he did the math, things became far more complicated. He realized that if he eventually introduced over a dozen species, there would be over 100 winners every week, which simply wasn't sustainable. And so, he decided to temporarily limit the rewards to only the top 5 anglers for each species leaderboard. The top 3 would still receive cash, while 4th place earned a free day and 5th place received 5 hours of free fishing. In addition to these weekly categories, he planned to introduce comprehensive monthly and annual leaderboards as well. But those were plans for another time. For now, he focused on how to announce the results to the community. He intended to post the rankings in the angler groups, confident that the reservoir's explosive popularity would guarantee plenty of attention. Even with only the coulters listed, the hype was already reaching a breaking point, which, to be honest, wasn't surprising at all. Normally, catching a single meter-long coulter anywhere else would go viral instantly, yet here at Yulong Village, it had only been 2 days. In that short time, several meter-long fish had already been caught, including some over 20 pounds. It was destined to be a hit. He felt a surge of excitement, realizing that once he added more species, he wouldn't even need to spend money on advertising. We see him quickly organizing the details of the Yulong Village Reservoir Big Fish Leaderboard and posting the announcement to the WeChat group. After that, he began making his rounds at the reservoir to announce the news in person and register the current catches. He made sure to record the real names and phone numbers of every angler who had landed a coulter weighing over 10 pounds. Naturally, he also carefully noted the exact weight of each fish directly into his phone for the official record. The plan was to finalize and publish the rankings early Monday morning, a move that was immediately met with praise from the anglers. One angler laughed, shouting that Limu had too many tricks up his sleeve and was practically forcing them to hunt for monsters. Others cheered for his success, calling him a boss who truly knew how to keep the game interesting for everyone involved. With the leaderboard live, the number of people wanting to fish at Yulong Village Reservoir was bound to increase even further. Deep down, Limu knew this was necessary because the fishing ban on public waters would end on July 1st. Once that happened, every private fishery would see a dip in business, and he was determined to ensure Yulong Village remained the exception. Although he could foresee that Yulong Village Reservoir would be the least affected, it wasn't immune, so he had just over a month to prepare. His goal was to minimize that impact as much as possible, and right now, we see the anglers getting excited all over again. Before long, Limu had recorded every single catch that met the leaderboard standards up to that point. This included the shorter of the two brothers from last night, who had seen the announcement in the group chat. He had contacted Limu immediately, and as of now, Brother Heisho held first place with a massive 24.7-pound catch. As time passed, he continued his rounds around the reservoir, keeping a close eye on the water for any new contenders. Anglers with cultures over 10 pounds proactively sought him out to register, though he had to turn away 5 new arrivals later on. He did this because the system was scheduled to upgrade the water area late tonight, and so, the clock ticked toward 10 o'clock. He began the process of buying back the fish, a task that continued intermittently until just after 1 in the morning. Finally, the last of the anglers at the Yulong Village Reservoir had packed up and departed for the night. The entire house on bay grew quiet and deserted at last, marking the end of a very long day. He couldn't help but let out a weary sigh before tidying up and heading back to the village office to settle the accounts. Rain had already begun to fall from the dark sky, yet he was surprised to find several cars still parked there. It seemed they had no intention of leaving. He guessed they planned to sleep in their cars to catch the early morning bite. To be honest, these people were the true legends of the fishing world, showing a level of dedication that was almost absurd. He realized that if more people like this showed up, there would certainly be a market for local goose houses in the future. Not wanting to disturb the sleeping anglers, he hurried home, washed up quickly, and finally collapsed onto his bed. He picked up his phone, unable to hide his anticipation as he calculated how much he had earned today after the fish buybacks. There were 93 anglers tonight, not quite 100, but adding the 41 from the morning, excluding Bai Yunhai, changed the math. That brought the total to 134 people, though about 20 of them had actually managed to turn a profit on him. The most successful angler had even managed to profit over 400 yuan from him. Besides those 20, many others came very close. Those who nearly broke even usually took a culta home with them, meaning that group didn't really lose any money at all. When we calculate the final numbers after the cost of buying back the fish, he had earned 38,600 yuan in a single day. They say the sound of midnight rain brings peace to the soul, but as he lay there in bed, his heart was racing with excitement. Looking at the balances on his WeChat and Alipay, he found it impossible to stay calm. 38,600 yuan, all in one day. To be honest, who could stay calm after that? Yet he also realized that building a true vacation fishing paradise would require significant capital. He decided to take things one step at a time. Perhaps after another 2 days of earnings, he could begin his first major project. He planned to pave the road from the reservoir to the main highway with cement, making the commute much more convenient for everyone. Next, he turned his attention back to the big catch leaderboard rewards, finally finalizing the prize amounts for the top contenders. Following his original plan, the top 5 would receive prizes settled weekly, with the first place winner taking home 3,000 yuan. Second place would earn 2,000, third place 1,000, while the fourth and fifth place finishers would receive something different. They would be rewarded with a full day and 5 hours of free fishing respectively, which meant giving away 6,000 yuan in cash every week. That totaled 24,000 yuan a month. Just thinking about that sum caused him a sharp, physical pang of regret. But as the saying goes, you can't catch the wolf without sacrificing the child, or in this case, the bait for the anglers. He figured he could earn those 20,000 yuan back in a single weekend, so he quickly posted the detailed reward plan to the group chat. While there, he checked the video he had posted at noon of Brother Heisho pulling in that massive fish. To his utter shock, it already had over 2 million views and 12,000 followers. The video had clearly gone viral. Feeling a surge of energy, he clicked in to see 60,000 likes and over 50,000 comments. Good heavens! With over 100,000 shares, the data was staggering. He was stunned, but he also found himself feeling quite confused. He wondered if his own video had truly exploded on its own, or if it was because Fengying hadn't deleted his previous comment. He wondered if the traffic was flowing in from that other source, so he quickly checked Fengying's video to see what had happened. To his surprise, the comment he left under Fengying's video hadn't been deleted. In fact, Fengying had actually pinned it to the top. We see that Fengying's video had already reached a staggering 410,000 likes by this point. Even his own comment on that thread had managed to rack up 170,000 likes of its own. He felt a sudden wave of gratitude toward Fengying. He never expected the man would actually help him advertise like this. He told himself that if he ever met Fengying in person, he would have to thank him properly for the boost. It seemed the Yulong Village Reservoir was truly about to become famous. A 20-pound coulter really was an unbeatable marketing tool. With a wide smile, he returned to his own account and took a curious peek at the comment section of his viral video. The comments were pure gold, with people shouting in disbelief about whether a coulter that size could actually be wild. Others noted it looked at least 20 pounds and joked about the poor guy whose net broke at the last second. One commenter even joked that the fishermen might jump into the reservoir out of pure despair after losing a catch like that. Another claimed they wouldn't be able to sleep for a year if such a massive fish had escaped them right at the finish line. There were so many comments that he spent a long time reading them before finally drifting off to sleep as the rain fell all night. The rain stopped at dawn, but at 6 in the morning, while he was still fast asleep, a sudden knocking at the door startled him. He assumed it was Sister Yulan bringing breakfast again, but when he opened the door, he found Brother Goer standing there instead. Brother Goer stood outside with a silly, honest grin, proudly wearing the brand new shirt and trousers he had been given. He couldn't help but smile, asking if the new clothes fit well, and Brother Goer nodded with a simple, happy expression. The man said they fit perfectly and admitted he had never worn such nice clothes before, which made our protagonist sigh quietly. He realized he needed to set up a proper salary for Brother Goer soon, as the man's life had been far too difficult for too long. And so, he and Brother Goer each cooked a pack of instant noodles before heading out to the reservoir together. We see that by only 6:30 in the morning, the rural road below the reservoir was already lined with more than 10 cars. Some vehicles had just arrived, and several anglers were busy organizing their gear. Seeing this, he immediately sent a message to Yulan. He transferred 1,000 yuan to her so she could prepare ingredients for lunch and dinner, and once that was settled, he turned his attention back. He took a quick look at the reservoir and noticed that it had grown much longer and narrower as it stretched through the mountain bays. The rising water had completely covered the bottom of the bays on both sides, which had previously been nothing but exposed earth. Combined with the surrounding scenery, the natural landscape looked even more beautiful. Meanwhile, Brother Goer stared at the water in total confusion. The reservoir had grown so suddenly that the man scratched his head, wondering aloud how it could have possibly become so large overnight. He explained to Brother Goer that since this was a natural mountain reservoir, last night's rain had caused the water levels to rise significantly. Brother Goer simply gave another one of his honest, silly grins, accepting the explanation, while our protagonist began to think ahead. Now that the water area upgrade was complete, he could move on to upgrading the fish species, and right then, 30 anglers suddenly surrounded him. They were all carrying their heavy gear, and he greeted them with a chuckle, teasing them about how incredibly early they had arrived. One of the anglers immediately shot back that for a true fisherman, once the sun is up, it can't be considered early anymore. A few others admitted they hadn't even gone home last night, choosing instead to sleep in their cars to secure a prime spot. After the small talk, the group got straight to the point, urging him to take their money so they could start hunting for that top-tier culter. Another joked that after losing out yesterday, today was the day he'd get his revenge, but he asked everyone to stay calm for a moment. He explained that the water area had officially been upgraded, and since the fishing session ended last night, things were about to change. He had completed a new management task, which meant the next step was to upgrade the variety of fish available in the reservoir. He shared the news about the new fish species with the crowd, and as expected, the anglers became visibly excited at the prospect. However, he knew that the system's new species would likely come with an increase in the fishing fees, a classic trade-off, really. So he took the opportunity to warn them that fees might go up, though he promised the buyback price for their catch would rise accordingly. And so, he asked Brother Goer to look after the anglers and brew some tea while he stepped away. He needed to find the system to upgrade the fish species, so he quickly found a secluded spot and summoned it. The system began a random draw for the new species, and soon congratulated him on acquiring the crucian carp. Hearing the name of this particular fish, he froze for a moment. To be honest, he had expected something more exotic. He hadn't imagined it would be the humble crucian carp, a fish that, while common, isn't exactly a high-tier prize. Yet, we must admit it is one of the most widely targeted species in the fishing world, known for its nutritional value. It is also one of the favorite species for veteran anglers during this season, though they usually have one specific preference. In the end, every fisherman wants a large crucian carp, but since it's a small species, even the biggest ones have limits. Even the pungza variety theoretically only reaches about 10 pounds, and it was clear to him that this wasn't the case here. The fish provided by his system wouldn't be a lab-grown variety like the pungza or the engineering crucian carp. No, these would be wild native crucian carp, which typically only reach a maximum of 2 or 3 pounds. Finding one that breaks the 10-pound mark is almost unheard of in the wild, which made him wonder about the appeal. The system then announced a new management task. He was to invite people to fish at the Yulong Village Reservoir. The new price was set at 120 yuan per hour, with a minimum requirement of 5 hours per session. Once 80 people paid to fish, he would earn another opportunity to upgrade the entire fishing grounds. He noted that the required number of people had doubled again, which was expected, but the price hike caught his eye. The jump from 100 to 120 yuan was actually much smaller than the previous price increase. Since the fee for these crucian carp only went up by 20 yuan, he felt the price was quite reasonable. He decided to keep the buyback price at 3 yuan, and with the upgrade finished, he returned to the reservoir. We see that while there were only about 50 anglers earlier, in just half an hour, the crowd had grown significantly. The crowd had already swelled to about 70 people, which was quite a staggering sight, especially with Saturday just around the corner. He knew the turnout would be even more impressive today, so he gathered the anglers to explain the new fish species and the 20 yuan price increase. To his surprise, the veteran anglers began to complain the moment they heard the price had only gone up by 20 yuan. They told him he was underestimating them, noting that 20 yuan wouldn't even buy a bag of bait, especially since he still provided 2 meals. They all agreed the small increase was more than fair, and one by one, the group began scanning the code to pay their fees. It is worth noting that the tall and short brothers from the other night were among them, as people continued to arrive until 8 in the morning. Just after 8, the large man who had caused a bit of a scene the previous day appeared with a wide smile on his face. And he wasn't alone. He had brought along the female streamer who had been dragged into the water the morning before. The big man greeted him warmly, immediately offering him a high-end cigarette as a gesture of goodwill. He asked how the reservoir had grown so much overnight, and was told it was simply due to the rising water levels from the rain. After giving his explanation, he curiously asked the big man what his relationship was with the streamer, prompting a hearty laugh. The man pointed to her and explained she was his biological sister, a revelation that left him staring at the pair in complete disbelief. The sister was as beautiful as a flower while the brother was built like a tank. Their father must have had some truly diverse genes. The big man, clearly anxious to get started, urged him to take their money quickly so they wouldn't miss the morning bite. He insisted that every remaining minute was precious, and to be honest, his enthusiasm for fishing was hard to ignore. The sister, Dikengzi, looked at him with a smile and promised that she wouldn't be dragged into the water by a fish today. He gave them both a knowing chuckle and pulled out the QR code so they could settle their payment. Once they were settled and no new anglers seemed to be arriving, he decided it was time to perform a perimeter check of the reservoir. As he walked the grounds, he noticed that despite the increased surface area, the overall water level hadn't actually risen much. Instead, the water had simply pushed further into the mountain bays, making the entire reservoir appear much longer and narrower. The average width had expanded as well, and far from ruining the fishing spots on either side, it actually improved them. Because the water surface was now 10 times larger and much more elongated, the available fishing spots around the reservoir had increased significantly, even if we exclude the areas where fishing is impossible due to the terrain. Spacing the spots 3 meters apart meant the reservoir could now accommodate 600 or 700 anglers at once. After completing his rounds, Li Jian, the veteran angler who had caught that 20-pound topmouth coulter, arrived on the scene. His expression was even more excited than usual as he joked about cleaning him out today, which he welcomed with a smile. Running a fishery is a game of averages. After all, even if a dozen people managed to beat the house, it hardly mattered. In fact, seeing someone actually outfish the owner is a great way to attract more seasoned anglers to the water. Next, he did a quick tally and found that 98 people had already paid their fees to fish, and that wasn't all. There were also several spectators just watching the action, just as he felt the morning rush was finally over. Bai Yunhai suddenly appeared out of nowhere. To be honest, he had almost forgotten about the man entirely. We see Bai Yunhai lugging a massive pile of gear, shouting his name at the top of his lungs as he descended into the bay. He asked Li Mu how the reservoir had become so massive, so Li Mu stepped forward to offer a quick explanation. He told him the water rose during the midnight rain, then asked what on earth he was doing with so much equipment. Bai Yunhai caught his breath and explained it was all the merchandise for sale, adding that his car was still full of more gear. He suggested calling over Goer to help move it all, and soon, the two of them were helping Bai Yunhai haul the stock. Once they had moved everything down to the reservoir, he decided to send out a notification to the group chat. He listed all the fishing lines, bait, and other supplies they now had for sale, so the anglers would be in the loop. Then, he added a quick update, informing the group that crucian carp had been officially added to the reservoir today. Consequently, the big fish rankings now included a crucian carp category, with rewards matching those of the topmouth coulter list. However, there was a catch. To make it onto the crucian carp leaderboard, the fish had to weigh at least 2 pounds. While the first message about the new gear was received well enough, this second update caused quite a stir. The group chat practically exploded. Some joked that if Li Mu didn't want to give out rewards, he should just say so. A 2-pound crucian carp? They wondered what kind of monster fish that would even be, perhaps a genetically modified one. Seeing their disbelief, Li Mu quickly typed out a reply, explaining that these weren't some laboratory-grown fish. He assured them they were authentic, wild crucian carp that were surprisingly easy to catch if they were willing to try. Immediately, a skeptic fired back, claiming he had never even seen a wild crucian carp break the 1-pound mark. He demanded to know if the reservoir truly held such giants, or if Li Mu was simply pulling their collective leg. Others joined in, convinced the owner was just teasing them for his own amusement. Yet, considering the giant minnows and loaches they'd seen, some wondered if he might actually be telling the truth. The only way to find out, of course, was to start fishing. Just as Li Mu was about to reply to the group, he received a private message from Dechengzi, the sister of the heavy-set man from earlier, asking him to visit her. She claimed to have a question for him, so he playfully asked what kind of fun she had in mind at her spot. Dechengzi sent back a shy emoji, telling him they could play whatever he wanted. Yes, quite the bold invitation. Feeling a bit flustered, he joked that he hadn't been with a woman in 28 years and asked if she was sure. She responded with a simple smiling face, clearly enjoying the banter as he made his way over to her fishing spot. He arrived to find that, likely for the sake of her livestream, Dechengzi had chosen a rather secluded location. There was no one else around, not even her younger brother was in sight. A perfect spot for a quiet conversation. He greeted her with a smile, asking the beautiful angler what exactly she had planned for their little playtime. But De Chengzi didn't look up. She simply cleared her throat, her eyes fixed intently on the float bobbing in the water. He found it a bit baffling. She was the one who invited him to play, yet now she was ignoring him. He glanced over at De Chengzi's phone, which was currently broadcasting a live stream to over 800 viewers, and decided to break the silence by speaking to her again. He asked the beautiful angler if she planned on actually talking to her fans, noting that letting them just watch in silence wasn't great for business. De Chengzi finally turned to look at him, explaining that she couldn't talk constantly, not when everyone was waiting for her to land a fish. He nodded, though he remained skeptical, and began reading the comments scrolling rapidly across the livestream screen. One viewer joked about the creepy voice they heard, only to realize it was actually the owner of the Yulong village reservoir himself. The chat immediately shifted, with fans daring De Chengzi to catch a massive top-mouth coulter right then and there. One person even promised to gift a virtual big plane if she could pull in a 20-pound monster from the depths. Another viewer teased that the first guy just wanted to see her get pulled into the water. They then asked Limu for a favor. They wanted him to confirm if the streamer was actually as beautiful in real life as she appeared in her filtered videos. The comment felt strangely familiar. He was certain he'd seen the same person ask this yesterday, so he took a long look at De Chengzi. After studying her profile as she sat by the water, he turned back to the camera to give the viewers his honest assessment. He told them that between filters and lighting, there's always a gap between the internet and reality. That's just how it is for everyone. This statement caused a massive wave of shock to erupt in the chat, but then he skillfully pivoted his tone. Speaking quite objectively, he continued his review for the growing audience, ensuring he stayed perfectly honest about what he saw. He admitted that their streamer was actually quite stunning in person, possessing both a lovely face and a very impressive figure. He even went so far as to compliment her curves, which naturally caused the chat to explode with praise and laughter. As the viewership surged past 1,000 people, Limu saw a golden opportunity and decided to take a little advantage of the moment. He called out to the viewers, asking them to follow his own account by searching for the Yulong village reservoir. He thanked them for the support, leaving De Chengzi completely stunned by his sudden and shameless bit of self-promotion. Limu sat back down, looking utterly speechless, yet De Chengzi still didn't say a word, focusing entirely on her fishing. Seeing her ignore him like that, he didn't plan on staying much longer. But just as he was about to leave, De Chengzi's fishing reel suddenly began to scream. She shouted that she had a bite, and Limu calmly lit a cigarette, telling her to stay steady and hold onto the rod. He warned her not to let the fish escape. It didn't look very large, and it appeared to be one of the crucian carp he had just upgraded today. Once De Chengzi managed to scoop it up with the net using one hand, we see it was at least a pound, a very respectable size for a crucian carp. De Chengzi was instantly delighted. She removed the hook and held the fish with both hands to show it off. She held it up for the viewers in front of the camera, though it was quite obvious that she was a novice who didn't know much about fish. But while she was clueless, the viewers in the livestream were experts. They noticed the slim body of the fish immediately. It wasn't broad like farm-raised fish, and its scales had a golden tint. They wondered if it was a genuine wild crucian carp. One viewer insisted there was no doubt. Their family used to raise carp, and they confirmed this was a pure, wild-bred specimen. The chat marveled that the Yulong village reservoir seemed to have everything. If it weren't so far away, they'd all be there fishing right now. At this point, Limu took a closer look at the carp himself. It was indeed a wild crucian carp, without a shadow of a doubt. Deep down, he felt a sense of relief, and seeing the excitement in the chat made De Chengzi even happier. She quickly turned to put the fish into the keep net, but then she turned back to him and finally spoke her mind. She asked where he sourced such large wild carp and top-mouth coulters, doubting he could have raised them naturally himself. Limu looked at De Chengzi with a look of pure confusion. He asked if she had invited him over just to interrogate him about his business. De Chengzi froze for a moment and immediately denied it, claiming she was just asking out of idle curiosity. He gave a small chuckle, having already sensed a pattern. Yesterday, the man known as Big Fatty had asked him the exact same thing. Now Big Fatty's sister was asking today. There was clearly something going on here, so he decided to be blunt with her. He told her that his sourcing channels were the very foundation of his livelihood, hardly something he would just give away. He asked her if he was supposed to just give up his business secrets, making it clear he wouldn't tell a soul, not even if she swore an oath. De Chengzi stood up instantly, looking completely stunned, and actually raised her hand as if she were about to take a formal vow. Seeing her look so incredibly serious, Limu felt a sudden spark of mischief, and who could blame him, really? He leaned in and whispered to De Chengzi to go ask her brother, claiming he'd already told him yesterday, before adding one more thing. He remarked that her hair smelled lovely before walking away with a chuckle, leaving De Chengzi standing there, utterly dazed and confused. Once he was safely out of sight, she returned to her seat on the fishing box and quickly pulled out a second phone. She opened WeChat to message her father, explaining that she had asked, but the boss still refused to say a word. The reply came quickly, suggesting that since the boss was around her age, she should find a way to work there instead. The idea was to infiltrate his operation from the inside, which would surely allow her to uncover his secrets eventually. As soon as she read those words, Dechungzi's eyes lit up with a newfound sense of purpose. She immediately began typing back to her father with excitement. She agreed enthusiastically, wondering why she hadn't thought of such a brilliant plan herself. To be honest, it was the perfect excuse to stay close to the action. She noted how popular the reservoir's investigation had become, mentioning that her live stream had gained traction the moment she started. In just a short while, she had attracted hundreds of viewers to her broadcast. The count had even surpassed 1,000 people just moments ago. Her follower count was growing steadily as well, which was a very welcome bonus. She decided she would tell the boss she wanted to work for him, convinced she could eventually charm the truth out of him. Meanwhile, we see that Li Mu had already made his way over to where Dechungzi's brother, Big Fatty, was stationed. But as he looked at Big Fatty's current fishing setup, he found himself completely bewildered by what he saw on the ground. A massive pile of cut leader lines lay scattered about, next to several boxes of spares, one of which, a 20-pack, was nearly empty. Li Mu narrowed his eyes, unable to keep quiet any longer, and asked the man how on earth he was fishing, as he couldn't make sense of it. Big Fatty was in a frantic rush to change his line. Hearing the voice, he didn't even look up, sounding incredibly agitated. He claimed the big fish were biting like crazy, which piqued Li Mu's interest enough to make him step closer to investigate the situation. But when we look into Big Fatty's fish guard, we see only 3 small coulters, each weighing barely a pound or 2. Li Mu questioned him immediately, asking what the hell was going on. He hadn't landed a single big one despite claiming they were biting constantly. Big Fatty refused to back down, insisting that he had already snapped several lines because the big fish were hitting his bait so aggressively. He felt certain the school was thick in his fishing spot and wasn't leaving, but Li Mu simply rolled his eyes at the explanation. When asked why he didn't just use a thicker, stronger line, Big Fatty had a very specific, if questionable, rebuttal ready. He argued that a thicker line would scare the fish away. At that moment, Li Mu felt a strong urge to give him a piece of his mind. We must remember that Li Mu isn't just the owner of the fishery. He is a seasoned angler himself with top-tier technical skills. His record is undeniable, yet this stubborn fellow refused to listen, quickly swapping in another thin leader line instead. He hooked some fresh corn, cast his line out, and then threw a massive spoonful of corn into the water to create a feeding frenzy. This time, Li Mu watched closely. As soon as that spoonful of corn hit the surface, the action began almost instantly. The float on the water gave a sharp, subtle tug, and while Big Fatty stared at it with pure excitement, he didn't strike yet. He chose not to set the hook, and just as Li Mu opened his mouth to say something, the float suddenly dipped again. It was a massive 3-inch plunge that nearly gave Li Mu a heart attack from the tension, but luckily, Big Fatty finally struck. He jerked the rod back with a powerful motion, and for a second, the line hummed, before the rod suddenly snapped back upright. Another fish lost. Big Fatty looked at Li Mu with a bitter smile, asking if he had seen exactly what happened. He complained that his last several casts had ended the same way, with a snapped line, convinced it was the work of giant coulters. Watching Big Fatty's amateurish technique was more than Li Mu could bear, so he finally rushed over and snatched the rod right out of his hands. He told him to give it a rest, as he'd never catch a thing that way, and offered to give him a proper demonstration while Big Fatty reluctantly stepped aside. After taking his seat on the fishing box, Li Mu handed his phone over to Big Fatty so he could help with a small task. He jokingly told him to record the video well, as he intended to use the footage for an advertisement later on. Li Mu then told his brother-in-law to watch closely and see how a real professional handles the water. Big Fatty was momentarily stunned, asking why on earth he was being called that, which Li Mu found absolutely hilarious. Deciding to lean into the joke, Li Mu teased that Big Fatty's sister liked him and had even invited him over to play earlier. He claimed she was too shy when he arrived and even tried to find excuses to make him stay. It was then that Big Fatty remembered something. He recalled that his sister had come today specifically on a mission from their father, and hearing Li Mu's version of events made him pause. He couldn't help but chuckle quietly to himself, thinking Li Mu was being a bit narcissistic, while Li Mu focused back on the task at hand. We see Li Mu open the tackle box and, without a second thought, swap the flimsy gear for a much sturdier 2.0-liter line. He baited the hook with 2 kernels of fresh corn, cast the line, and waited for the float to settle into its proper position. Then he picked up the bait spoon to start a dynamic chumming rhythm, though Big Fatty immediately complained that the cast was too short. Li Mu cut him off, telling him to stay quiet and just watch the performance. The first spoonful of bait hit the water, but there was no reaction. He followed up with a second spoonful, still nothing, and then waited a full minute before preparing the third. For this third scoop, however, he didn't take corn from the basin, but instead scooped up a handful of loose soil from the ground behind him. He tossed the dirt in, set the spoon aside, and fixed his eyes on the float with intense concentration. Deep down, he was filled with anticipation, and right on cue, the float suddenly plunged deep underwater in a massive strike. His spirits soared as he gripped the rod with both hands, and that beautiful, high-pitched hum of the line began to sing. Big Fatty, still recording, gasped in shock, wondering how Li Mu had known to strike when he hadn't even seen the fish bite yet. Against all odds, he actually hooked a fish, and Li Mu shot Big Fatty a mocking look, laughing at his slow reaction speed. He told him he was reacting like a confused old man, leaving Big Fatty speechless, though Li Mu was far too busy to care. At that moment, he was lost in the wonderful hum of the line and the heavy, powerful pull of the fish in the water. He felt a surge of genuine excitement as the nearby anglers, still waiting for a bite, all turned their heads to watch the struggle. They whispered that the big guy who arrived late had incredible luck since the big fish kept heading his way, despite his poor skills. They noted how he kept snapping his lines, but now that the boss had stepped in to help, they wondered if the line would hold. Li Mu felt that his goal of personally catching a massive coulter fish was finally within reach, so he stood up to take control. He began steadily playing the fish, and we have to admit, the thrill of the fight was truly exhilarating for him. Watching from the side, Big Fatty's eyes were practically red with envy as he shouted that the boss was amazing, even if he was just playing around. Li Mu told him not to waste his time, jokingly insisting he was simply tiring the fish out, which he continued to do for a while longer. Once he sensed the timing was perfect, he gave the order to Big Fatty, calling him brother-in-law again and telling him to get the net. Big Fatty had been ready for ages. The moment he heard the command, he moved in with the net as the fish's head broke the surface. Li Mu quickly set down the rod and rushed over to help, and together, they finally hauled the massive coulter onto the bank. Big Fatty was buzzing with excitement as he pulled out a hand scale to weigh the catch, all while keeping the camera rolling for the video. Under the lens, the scale clearly displayed a weight of 15.3 pounds, prompting Big Fatty to start shamelessly flattering him. He called the boss mighty and handsome, but Li Mu simply gave a cool wave, telling him it was just a basic maneuver and not to overreact. After handing the rod back to Big Fatty, Li Mu prepared to resume his patrol, but Big Fatty immediately grabbed him to ask for advice. He wanted a summary of what he'd done wrong, so Li Mu took a moment to explain his mistakes one by one. In reality, there were three main reasons why Big Fatty couldn't land a fish, the first being that his leader line was far too thin. The giant coulter fish had already entered the area, but because he was such a novice, he was trying to catch a 15-pound fish with flimsy gear. It would be a miracle if the line didn't snap. Secondly, Big Fatty forgot he was float fishing rather than bottom fishing for smaller species. Because of that, he had to strike the moment he saw a bite. Thirdly, he shouldn't cast the line too tight, and with that, Li Mu simply turned and walked away. Big Fatty sat on his fishing box, looking completely dazed, before calling out to ask what the scoop of dirt Li Mu threw earlier was for. Li Mu didn't even look back, telling him not to worry about it, and suggesting he just use small, frequent amounts of corn instead. He reminded him that once a fish is hooked, he must lead it away from the school before trying to tire it out. Big Fatty looked genuinely moved, shouting his thanks, just as Bai Yunhai called to say he and Goer had finished setting up the sales shelves. Li Mu headed over immediately and found a flat piece of high ground by the mountain bay where a large tarp had been spread out. On top of the tarp, they had neatly arranged all sorts of fishing supplies, along with bottles of mineral water and various sodas. He nodded in approval, but a practical concern quickly crossed his mind. What would Bai Yunhai do with the goods if it started raining? Bai Yunhai just smiled, explaining that he had brought along a large tent specifically to keep everything dry if the weather turned. They could simply move the stock inside if needed. Right then, a few excited anglers came running toward them from the water. The man in the lead was beaming with pride, holding up a massive coulter fish and shouting from a distance for the boss to come see. He desperately wanted his catch registered, certain it weighed at least 10 pounds and would earn him a spot on the big fish leaderboard. Li Mu chuckled and offered his congratulations, a sight that immediately triggered Bai Yunhai's own suppressed urge to go fishing. Bai Yunhai asked if Li Mu could watch the stall for a bit so he could cast a line, but Li Mu just gave him a sharp look. He refused, noting he was far too busy hosting other guests, but he did suggest letting Goer keep an eye on the stall instead. After Li Mu finished registering the angler's impressive catch, the man noticed the supply stall and decided to do a little shopping. He picked out 2 bottles of water, a box of premium purple fishing line, and a pack of soft jade cigarettes. Bai Yunhai busied himself gathering the items for the man, reciting the prices for each one as he handed them over. The water was 3 yuan a bottle, the line was 30, and the cigarettes were another 30, a fair price for a successful day at the lake. The man muttered something under his breath as he reached for his wallet. Watching from the side, Li Mu's eyes widened in disbelief, noticing the mineral water was clearly a generic, off-brand bottle. He estimated the wholesale price was barely 50 cents, yet Bai Yunhai, that little profiteer, was charging 3 yuan, and then there was the fishing line. Forget factory prices, you could probably find that same box for 10 yuan on a discount app, and as for the soft jade cigarettes, they usually retailed for 22 yuan a pack, so once the customer paid and left, Li Mu turned to Bai Yunhai. He told him that while things can be a bit pricey, he shouldn't push it, especially charging 30 yuan for a pack of cigarettes. If someone reported him, he'd be facing a heavy fine, and after thinking it over, Bai Yunhai realized Li Mu had a point. He decided to adjust the prices, setting them only 1 or 2 yuan above the standard market rate instead. With things settled for the moment, Li Mu resumed his patrol, and after completing another full lap around the area, he finally noticed a rather interesting trend among the crowd, including those who weren't even fishing. Out of the 100 or so people present, at least 10 were currently live streaming, while another 20 or more were busy recording videos of the fishing process, which was a bit much, even for a popular spot like this. It wasn't that he minded them gaining a following from his reservoir. After all, the exposure helped the business, but the streamers were a different story. If they were going to broadcast, the least they could do was pay the fishing fee, so he approached the most active-looking man among them. He asked the man if he planned on doing any actual fishing, but the streamer simply shook his head with a dismissive look. With a rather arrogant tone, the man asked why he would bother fishing when he was clearly busy with his live stream. Deep down, Limu felt a surge of irritation. The man was streaming at his reservoir without permission and acting entitled to boot. Suppressing his anger, he calmly asked the man how many viewers he currently had in his room. The man tilted his head impatiently, snapping that it was only about 3,000 people and there was no need for all the questions. He told the boss he wasn't fishing and that he should leave so he could get back to interacting with his audience. Hearing this only fueled Limu's anger, as 3,000 viewers was hardly a small number, especially compared to Deshang's usual audience. He suspected that even Deshang didn't have that many viewers right now, and a streamer with such a following could certainly afford the fishing fee. It seemed the man took him for a pushover, a sheep ready to be sheared, but Limu knew that starting a shouting match would be useless. If he lost his temper, the bystanders who didn't know the full story might mistake him for being petty or stingy. Suppressing his rage, he told the man to hand over the phone so he could say a quick hello to the viewers in the live stream. The man handed it over without a second thought, and Limu immediately addressed the digital crowd watching the screen. He greeted the audience, introducing himself as the owner of the Yulong Village Reservoir, assuming they were already familiar with the local fishing scene. He extended a warm invitation to anyone nearby to come visit for a day of fishing whenever they had the time. Then, shifting his tone, he continued by pointing out a few facts regarding the streamer they were currently watching. He explained that he didn't know the man, and that the streamer had arrived without paying or even asking permission to film the entire area. He asked the audience if they would really call him petty for stopping the broadcast, then suggested they look for other streamers at the reservoir. Specifically, he told them to search for Dekingzi Loves Fishing if they wanted to see a proper broadcast of the action. It was only then that the man realized what was happening and tried to grab the phone back, but Limu was faster. He abruptly ended the live stream, prompting the man to point a finger at him in a fit of rage, demanding to know what he was doing. Limu sternly replied that he wouldn't allow non-fishing streamers to wander around his business for free, as it would set a terrible precedent. The man shouted back even louder, arguing that Limu should have just asked him to stop instead of shutting down his feed. Limu's own temper flared as he pointed out that since the man hadn't asked to start the stream, he didn't need permission to end it. Nearby, Go-urge heard the commotion and the sound of the argument escalating, and he immediately rushed over to intervene. There was no smile on Go-urge's face this time. Even before Limu could say a word about a fight, the man moved like a weapon. Like a cannonball launched from its chamber, Go-urge slammed directly into the man standing in front of Limu, sending him reeling. The man went flying and crashed onto the ground, his phone and live streaming rig tumbling right along with him. We see Limu standing there in total shock, but Go-urge wasn't finished and looked ready to charge again. Limu lunged forward to hold him back, but Go-urge was as strong as an ox, nearly knocking Limu off his feet. He simply couldn't restrain him, so Limu shouted at the top of his lungs for Go-urge to stop fighting. It seemed Go-urge had entered a trance-like state and couldn't hear a word, landing another heavy punch on the man. Limu tried once more to pull him away, but to be honest, he didn't stand a chance against that raw strength. He quickly called over by Yunhai and several nearby fishermen, and it took 5 of them to finally hold Go-urge back. The streamer sat on the ground nearby while others checked his injuries. Luckily, one of the anglers was a surgeon. Once Limu saw Go-urge finally start to calm down, he let go and went to check on the situation. He asked the doctor if the man was going to be alright, hoping for the best in a bad situation. The doctor replied that no bones were broken and no vital organs hit. He just needed to stop the bleeding and rest. With his duty done, the doctor headed back to his fishing spot, and Limu thanked him by gifting him an extra hour. However, the fallen streamer began throwing a fit, pointing a finger and screaming that he was going to call the police. He demanded a medical evaluation, swearing that he would sue Limu for malicious assault and make him pay. Just then, a man stepped out from the crowd and introduced himself as a lawyer to explain the reality of the situation. He noted that Go-urge appeared to have mental health issues, meaning a lawsuit might be useless since Limu hadn't ordered the attack. At most, the lawyer suggested he could seek financial compensation, which is when Limu decided to chime in. He told the man not to count on money, as Go-urge was a loner with absolutely nothing to his name. The man stayed on the ground, throwing a tantrum and insisting that he would call the police regardless of the circumstances. He threatened that if Limu didn't pay him 30,000, he would poison the reservoir and kill every single fish. Limu's expression immediately darkened, but before he could even speak, another man stepped forward from the crowd. He told the streamer that if he wanted to call the police, there was no need. He was an officer from Dadong Town. It turned out he was just there on his day off to fish, and he pulled out his badge to show everyone. With a serious tone, he noted that he'd seen everything. The streamer had started broadcasting at the reservoir without permission. Furthermore, Go-Urge had charged in on his own. It certainly wasn't a case of the owner ordering an assault. Now, however, the streamer was guilty of making malicious threats and intimidating the owner, so they could all head to the station. He suggested they clarify everything there. The streamer could sue, but he would also be investigated for his own threats. The man on the ground thought it over before finally scurrying away in shame, and once the crowd dispersed, we returned to Limu. He took a moment to warn Go-Urge not to use his fists next time, and Go-Urge simply smiled and agreed. Feeling a bit guilty about the disturbance caused to the other anglers, Limu turned to Bai Yunhai with a plan. He instructed him to give every fisherman a free drink, insisting that the cost would be on his own tab. Deep down, however, he was still worried about the threat of poisoning, so he immediately consulted his system about the risk. He asked what would happen if someone actually tried to poison his fishing grounds, and the system answered him instantly. It explained that all waters within the fishing grounds were under constant monitoring, and if any poison were introduced, the system would automatically neutralize it in an instant. Hearing this, Limu smiled with a newfound sense of relief. With the system on his side, he felt truly invincible. As time passed, the memory of the conflict faded as quickly as it began. The curious onlookers soon returned to their spots, and as noon approached, Yang Yulan arrived with supplies. She wasn't alone. She was accompanied by the old village chief, Uncle Lu, who was dressed up with slicked-back hair. Seeing him, Limu greeted him with a smile and asked what had brought him all the way out there. At that moment, Uncle Lu was walking behind Yang Yulan, his eyes fixed quite shamelessly on her as she moved. On this particular day, Yang Yulan was wearing a form-fitting cheap house-style dress, and she had even gone to the trouble of styling her hair. The charm of a mature woman was on full display, making her more eye-catching than ever. Hearing the greeting, Uncle Lu quickly averted his gaze to look at Limu. He remarked on how lively the reservoir had become before explaining that he had some business to discuss. Limu, ever the host, pulled out a cigarette. He handed one to Uncle Lu and asked what had brought such a distinguished guest his way. Uncle Lu took the cigarette and lit it up. He took a deep drag and then, adopting his most official tone, noted that with so many people fishing here, Limu really ought to report everything to the village. He emphasized safety, warning that if anything went wrong, they would both be in significant trouble. Limu nodded quickly, assuring Uncle Lu that he would personally ensure that safety remained the top priority. Satisfied, Uncle Lu mentioned that the contract for the lease was finally ready and told Limu to stop by his office whenever he had the time. With the business concluded, Uncle Lu wandered over to where Yang Yulan was busy preparing the midday meal. He commented on how exhausting it must be to cook for so many people and offered to lend her a hand himself. Yang Yulan declined with a polite smile, telling the village chief that cooking simple, large-batch meals wasn't actually that tiring. But Uncle Lu simply chuckled, insisting on helping and telling her she was being far too modest. He even brought up a time a snake had crawled into her house at night, teasing her for not calling him for help back then. He claimed that as the village chief, it was his duty to serve her, and before she could protest, he grabbed a handful of green onions. He began to trim them, though his eyes remained fixed quite intently on Yang Yulan the entire time. To be honest, it looked as though the old man was about to start drooling, so Yang Yulan quickly called Go-Urge over to intervene. She asked Go-Urge to peel the onions instead, suggesting that the village chief was far too busy with important affairs to be burdened with such chores. Go-Urge ran over with a silly grin and snatched the onions right out of Uncle Lu's hands to finish the job. Uncle Lu stood up with a look of deep disappointment and let out a long, heavy sigh. Meanwhile, we see Limu approaching the water tank. He pulled out 2 large, 10-pound top-mouth coulters and handed them over to Uncle Lu as a parting gift. Limu mentioned that these top-mouth coulters were worth dozens of yuan per pound and insisted the village chief take them home. Uncle Lu let out a couple of dry coughs. He looked at Limu with a sudden air of gravity, asking if the boy was trying to lead him into making a professional mistake. Limu simply smiled and offered a quick explanation. He told Uncle Lu that this wasn't a mistake at all, but merely a junior showing respect to an elder with a couple of fish. This, naturally, brought the smile back to Uncle Lu's face. The village chief accepted the fish, and then we see Limu pull 2 packs of premium cigarettes from his pocket, tucking them directly into Uncle Lu's shirt pocket. Uncle Lu tugged at his pocket, insisting that such a gift really wasn't appropriate. Limu, however, immediately held the pocket closed to keep the gift inside. He repeatedly assured the man it was perfectly fine, and Uncle Lu, now looking thoroughly satisfied and wearing a broad grin, finally took his leave. Limu watched the village chief's retreating figure for a moment, lighting a cigarette of his own and taking a slow drag. Beside him, Yang Yulan stepped forward and remarked softly on how silver-tongued he was, admitting that she found that side of him quite charming. His face turned a shade of red, and he immediately tried to change the subject, telling Sister Yulan he would go fetch the fish she needed for cooking. Today's menu was another all-fish feast, though Yang Yulan planned to stir-fry some greens as well. A moment later, Limu returned with the necessary ingredients. With no pressing tasks left, he began to patrol the perimeter of the reservoir, pulling out his phone as he walked to check on his progress. He uploaded his latest video and then decided to take a quick look at how his previous posts were performing. The video of the thin, dark-skinned man pulling in a massive fish had already garnered over 100,000 likes, a staggering success, to be honest. The views had surpassed 5 million, and his follower count was nearing 20,000. Seeing these numbers, a new thought began to take shape. He realized he needed to hire someone soon to handle the daily chores, which would free him up to start live streaming and boost the reservoir's popularity. Just as he was considering this, Dikingzi ran over, looking incredibly excited, and thanked Limu for his help. He explained that the traffic Limu had redirected from that other streamer's room had flowed directly into his own broadcast. Dikingzi boasted that he now had over 2,000 viewers, to which Limu gave a calm nod of approval. Then, Dikingzi's tone shifted as he asked a surprising question. He asked if Limu's fishing factory needed any more workers, expressing a desire to work there. This statement made Limu pause in complete disbelief. He looked at Dikingzi, specifically noting the expensive diamond necklace hanging around the young man's pale neck, hardly the attire of a typical laborer. He also took note of the high-end tackle boxes and expensive fishing rods. Clearly, Dikingzi wasn't someone who was hurting for money. Seeing the look of surprise on Limu's face, Dikingzi spoke with sudden earnestness, insisting that this was no joke at all. Even after hearing the explanation, Limu found it hard to believe, noting that the wages at his fishing factory weren't exactly high. Besides, looking at the young man's style, he clearly didn't need the cash. Limu jokingly asked if he was after his good looks instead. Or perhaps, he wondered, if Dikingzi was trying to sniff out his secret supply channels. Dikingzi paused for a moment before speaking up. He admitted that the truth was simple. He truly wanted to work there because of his absolute passion for live streaming his fishing. His parents, however, constantly nagged him about being idle and jobless, so he figured if the reservoir needed help, it was the perfect solution. This way, he'd officially have a job to show them, and once he was off the clock, he could stay right there to fish and stream. To be honest, the logic was somewhat sound, though Limu still suspected this woman, as he playfully thought of the pretty youth, was after his secrets. But in the end, it didn't really matter. The fish were generated by his system, so no amount of prying would reveal the truth anyway. For a salary of 3,000 yuan, he'd be gaining a beautiful and capable employee, so he gave a nod and accepted the offer. He agreed to the arrangement, though he set the monthly wage at 2,800 yuan instead, just to see the reaction. The hours would be from 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, and he made it clear that if the pay was too low, Dikingzi could leave. Dikingzi hesitated for only a brief moment before agreeing, even noting that the commute from the city was far too long to do daily. Because of that, he planned to rent a room at Yang Yulan's house. With the deal settled, Limu headed over to see the man he called Big Fatty. He approached the large man's fishing spot with a grin, casually mentioning that his sister would be starting work at the reservoir tomorrow. Big Fatty, who had been focused intently on his line, looked up in complete confusion and demanded to know why that was happening. Limu simply shook his head with a laugh, saying he had no idea what kind of games the siblings were playing, but he needed the extra hands. Since he was short-staffed, he figured he might as well let her work. This left Big Fatty even more bewildered, so Limu followed up with a question. Noting their apparent wealth, he asked what kind of car his sister usually drove, to which Big Fatty gave a very nonchalant answer. A Porsche 911? Limu was genuinely shocked, jokingly wondering if he had just accidentally landed himself a wealthy benefactor. By noon, Yang Yulan had finished preparing lunch, and we see Limu and Goer Gu starting to collect the first batch of fish. Once the fish were weighed, the anglers lined up for lunch, and there was no doubt about their reaction to the meal. Everyone showered the food with praise, especially the wild crucian carp stewed with tofu. The freshness was simply on another level. It was enough to make any fisherman lose themselves in the flavor. After lunch, Dikingzi came running back to find Limu. He excitedly reported that he'd spoken with Sister Yulan, and she had agreed to let him stay at her house without even charging rent. This was exactly what Limu expected, so he began giving Dikingzi a brief rundown of the daily tasks at the reservoir. He wanted to ensure the young man could hit the ground running the next day. Soon, everyone had finished their midday meal. Looking around, Limu noticed that barely a third of the anglers had left, while the remaining 2/3 stayed behind. It seemed they were all waiting for the evening bite. Taking a moment, he checked the Big Catch rankings to see the current leaders. On the crucian carp leaderboard, a man named Zhang Ji held the top spot with a 2.2-pound catch, while the top warped-mouth fish remained the one caught by Old Pigeon. Limu then remembered the system task from that morning, which required 80 customers. By now, he was certain it was complete, so he found a quiet, secluded spot to call out to the system. He noted that nearly 100 people had arrived for the morning session, surely fulfilling the requirement for the 80-person task. The system replied immediately, confirming that the task was indeed complete and that he now had an unused upgrade opportunity. Without a moment's hesitation, Limu selected the upgrade option, asking the system to specifically upgrade his fish species. The system began a random draw for the new species, and soon, it congratulated him on unlocking a new addition, the carp. With the upgrade complete, Limu felt a surge of excitement. The arrival of carp was going to make things very interesting. For the Yulong Village Reservoir, carp were a serious game changer, not necessarily because of their taste, which is a matter of debate. In fact, people in some regions won't even touch them, but the carp produced by this system were bound to be different. Naturally, these would be far tastier than any ordinary carp found elsewhere, but that wasn't even the main point. The real draw was their size. Carp are a medium to large species, and the biggest among them are massive. They can grow much larger than the warped-mouth fish, and in the wild, 20-pounders are a common sight. Finding a 40-pound carp is perfectly normal, and honestly, even specimens over 100 pounds aren't unheard of. Since their growth limit can exceed 100 pounds, it meant that from this moment forward, the Yulong Village Reservoir was home to true giants. And for any angler, the lure of a 100-pound monster is, quite simply, irresistible. We can already imagine the scene when that first 100-pounder is finally hauled in. Li Mu felt a surge of excitement, certain that such a catch would make the reservoir famous across the entire country. However, a new concern quickly crossed his mind now that these heavy hitters were entering the game. He wondered just how much the system would increase the required fees for his next business objective. Without wasting time, he asked the system to reveal the details of his new management task. The system responded, instructing him to invite anglers to the reservoir at a price of 300 yuan per hour. With a 5-hour minimum stay, he needed 160 people to pay and fish to complete the task. Once achieved, he would earn another upgrade. To be honest, the news left Li Mu completely stunned. The fee had jumped from 120 to 300, a staggering increase of 180 yuan. A 5-hour session would now cost 1,500 yuan, and he worried the local anglers might actually revolt. This was no longer the price of an ordinary fishing spot, it was the rate of a specialized, high-end venue. We see this in elite big-game ponds, where every fish weighs at least dozens of pounds, or where the waters are filled with rare, high-value species. Some of those places even charge 1,000 yuan an hour. Of course, the buyback prices there are high too, sometimes paid per fish. But for Yulong Village, this was a bold leap. This would certainly qualify as an extraordinary fishing venue, but if he actually implemented that price, he was certain he would lose many local anglers who weren't exactly wealthy, even if he raised the buyback price. Those who lacked confidence in their skills wouldn't dare take the gamble. Now, aside from the rich and the true masters, beginners would have no hope at all. Li Mu felt quite helpless, as he couldn't change the system's goals. It seemed his only option was to raise the buyback price to 5 yuan per pound, though even that felt like a stretch. Ultimately, he had to pin his hopes on those 100-pound carp to lure the anglers in. To be honest, it was a risky play. Since he couldn't change the fees for tonight's session, he decided to start the new pricing plan on Saturday. Carp are bottom feeders anyway, and since many would be fishing for crucian carp tonight, they might just hook a giant. If word of those monsters spread, the anglers might actually accept tomorrow's price hike. Still, the system's demands were rising fast. The changes were becoming too frequent, and he realized he needed to find a more sustainable middle ground. After that, he headed to Dadong town to handle some business, starting with a visit to village chief Liu for the contract. His second task was to find a team to install solar streetlights. He quickly signed the papers and secured the lease. Next, he tracked down a manufacturer that sold and installed solar lights, settling on a price of 500 yuan per unit. Once the construction team was hired and everything was settled, he returned to the reservoir around 4 in the afternoon. By then, the banks were dotted with anglers carrying their gear, all waiting for the evening session to begin in an hour. We see Bai Yunhai has already found a spot to fish, choosing a location directly in line with his own stall. The water was shallow there, so he had waded in barefoot to set up a fishing platform. A dedicated hobbyist, clearly. About 10 people, including the familiar large man, were standing behind Bai Yunhai, watching him with great interest. Meanwhile, Goer was watching the stall for him. Li Mu approached and asked if Bai Yunhai had put him in charge. Goer nodded in response, and Li Mu couldn't resist making a small joke about the situation. He jokingly told Goer to go stand behind Bai Yunhai and give the kid a kick right into the reservoir. Goer simply nodded and immediately stood up to charge over, which is when Li Mu realized his mistake. He really shouldn't have joked with Goer like that. While others saw the humor, Goer took things quite literally. Since the man was actually going to do it, Li Mu quickly called him back, telling him to stop immediately. He explained it was just a joke and pulled a pack of high-end cigarettes from his pocket to share. He told Goer these were premium quality and would certainly hit the spot. Goer grinned, happily accepting one. The man marveled at the expensive gift, having never smoked anything like it, just as the large man approached. He asked if his sister was truly going home to pack her things and work there, and Li Mu confirmed it. He joked that she probably just liked him too much to stay away, and he simply couldn't stop her. The large man shrugged, looking quite speechless, before warning him that his sister might have other motives. He suggested that she might not actually like him, and that this was the only warning he could offer. He didn't want the boss to get his hopes up and end up heartbroken, much like his own past experience. His ex had apparently taken his money and run off with another man, leaving him devastated for a long time. Li Mu found the man's honesty quite refreshing, though he had already suspected De Kingzi had her own hidden agenda. He wasn't worried about money, and as for anything else, well, he could probably live with that. New anglers began arriving. We returned to the reservoir bank, where he quickly got to work greeting the crowd for the evening session. As people lined up to pay their fees, it became clear that the turnout tonight was going to be massive. While busy with the crowd, he noticed customers heading toward the stall and shouted over to Bai Yunhai. He yelled that people were waiting to buy things while Bai Yunhai was still busy fishing. The man looked up. Seeing the growing crowd, Bai Yunhai immediately reeled in his line to go manage the stall as time ticked on. As the crowd continued to swell, Li Mu immediately pulled out his phone to call Yang Yulan back in the village. He asked her to help keep an eye on things, ensuring the visitors parked properly so they wouldn't block the roads. He also emphasized the importance of parking safety, but right at 6 o'clock, things became even more lively. While a steady stream of anglers was still arriving, and a crowd surrounded him to pay their fees. A woman wearing a white floral dress suddenly squeezed through the crowd and began shouting directly at him. She demanded to know if he was the owner. Li Mu nodded, a bit stunned, and confirmed that he was. The surrounding anglers fell silent as he looked at her, noting her fierce expression and incredibly loud voice. In her hand, she wasn't holding fishing gear, but a wooden club she'd picked up. Clearly, she meant business. The onlookers were understandably confused by the situation as the woman began her interrogation. She explained that her husband, Wang Chong, was obsessed with fishing and had visited this reservoir before. He had taken off on his motorcycle with his gear that afternoon, and she wanted to know if he was there. Li Mu, feeling quite speechless, told her that with so many people coming through, he rarely asked for names. He truly had no idea who Wang Chong was, but the woman pressed on, mentioning he was 27. She asked if that rang a bell, but he simply shook his head. This only seemed to fuel her growing anger. She turned to the other anglers, yelling to ask if anyone had seen her husband, who apparently neglected his family for fishing. She threatened to beat him if she caught him, and to be honest, her intense aura was quite intimidating. Not a single person spoke up. Instead, the entire crowd instinctively took a collective step back. Realizing this scene would eventually hurt business, Li Mu spoke up to try and usher the woman away. He gently told her he had no memory of her husband being there today, at least not so far. He suggested she might have better luck looking elsewhere, to which she responded with a cold, skeptical snort. "None of you men who fish are any good," the woman roared, her anger flaring as she brandished the wooden club. She burst through the crowd and began circling the reservoir to search. Once she was finally at a distance, the surrounding crowd finally exhaled, whispering about how fierce she was and fearing for the poor guy if he got caught. They joked he'd be crippled just for fishing, while Li Mu watched her retreating figure from afar. He couldn't help but sigh, thinking that compared to this, even the legendary angler He Chong seemed less terrifying. Deep down, he felt a strange sense of relief that the storm had passed for the moment. Deciding to ignore the little interlude, he returned to his duties and continued collecting fees from the newcomers. After the woman finished her lap around the water without finding her target, we see her finally leave in a rage. With her gone, Li Mu put the matter out of his mind and focused back on the business at hand. By 7 o'clock, the stream of people finally began to thin out, and Yang Yulan started preparing dinner with Goer's help. De Kingsley arrived as well, but instead of fishing or live streaming, he surprisingly pitched in to help Yulan with the cooking. At this point, the number of active anglers scattered around the reservoir had reached a staggering 193. With over 50 spectators watching from the sidelines, the total crowd had swelled to about 250 people. Our protagonist, however, was focused on his system mission, keeping a very specific tally in his head. He was only 7 anglers short of the 200 mark, and he waited with quiet anticipation for a few more to arrive. Meanwhile, Bai Yunhai was kept busy selling supplies. Li Mu planned to do a patrol, but something caught his eye. He spotted a motorcycle descending from the distant mountain ridge and decided to wait a moment longer. It turned out to be Dashu and his brother, who greeted him with a grin, impressed by the massive crowd. Dashu couldn't believe how many people were there tonight, shouting that the boss was truly doing something incredible. Li Mu explained the rain had raised the water levels, while Dashu lit a cigarette and took a slow, thoughtful drag. Dashu explained he'd been delayed, but noted that a good meal is never late. He'd almost succeeded yesterday and felt tonight was his night. Suddenly remembering the woman from earlier, Li Mu asked him a rather random question. "Dashu, tell me, are you married?" Dashu chuckled, mentioning his child was already over a year old, before turning the question back on the boss. Li Mu just smiled. He admitted he'd considered marriage earlier that afternoon, but had since changed his mind after seeing a woman hunting for her husband. She had threatened to break her husband's legs, which Li Mu found terrifying. Hearing this, Dashu suddenly froze in place. He immediately asked if the woman had a mole on the side of her forehead, prompting Li Mu to think back for a moment. It seemed she did, and Li Mu confirmed it, wondering aloud if Dashu happened to know the unfortunate angler in question. Dashu stood dazed for a moment before shaking his head vigorously, claiming he didn't know her, but knew a fellow fisherman with a similar wife. He explained that this friend's wife was just as fierce and also had a mole on her forehead, a terrifying coincidence, to be sure. Li Mu nodded, suggesting that if it really was his friend's wife, Dashu should probably give the man a quiet heads up. After all, while fishing is important, one shouldn't let it completely ruin their domestic life. A fair point, wouldn't we agree? Dashu seemed lost in thought as he agreed and went to find a spot, quickly beginning to unpack his gear for the night. As it happened, the two anglers to his left were the same tall and short brothers who had been there a few nights prior. The brothers greeted him warmly, calling out to Dashu, but he just gave them a weary, knowing smile in return. He corrected them, explaining he was only 27 and just looked weathered. To be honest, the uncle nickname was starting to sting. He asked them to call him Wang Chong instead, but the moment the brothers heard that name, their expressions shifted to pure shock. They looked as if they'd seen a ghost, mentioning a woman with a wooden club who had been circling the reservoir earlier. She had been shouting the name, Wang Chong, at the top of her lungs, and they nervously asked if that person was him. Dashu's face stiffened for a split second before he flatly denied it, claiming it must have been someone else with the same name. The brothers sighed in relief, remarking that it was good it wasn't him, as that woman looked absolutely terrifying. The brothers remarked that while they were all fellow anglers, one shouldn't abandon their family and ignore all responsibilities just for the sake of fishing. They shouldn't leave everything to their wives, they said. Wang Chong gave a forced laugh, suggesting that perhaps everything was actually fine at home. He argued that some women simply can't stand seeing men go out to enjoy a bit of fishing. The brothers wanted to press the point further. Suddenly, a float twitched in the water, followed by a sharp whistling sound as the shorter brother reacted just in time. He hooked a fish steadily, and at that exact moment, his taller brother to the left also fell to strike on his line. In a stroke of luck, the taller brother managed to pull in 2 fish at once, proudly showing off his double-hooked catch. He asked if they were beautiful and suggested the others try for crucian carp, noting how easy they were to catch in this reservoir. He claimed some wild ones even weighed over 2 pounds, but the shorter brother immediately noticed something was off about the catch. Upon closer inspection, the taller brother realized his mistake. These weren't carp at all, but 2 small, wild red-tailed fish. They were pristine, wild specimens without a single scratch. He mused that if there were small ones here, there might be giants lurking below. The thought of a massive fish was almost terrifying. While the brothers chatted over their catch, Wang Chong was busy adjusting his gear. Once everything was ready, he settled onto his small stool, determined to spend the night targeting topmouth culta once again. For bait, he was using tinder corn, but his secret weapon was the crushed, lion's mane bait he had prepared earlier that afternoon. He had gone out of his way to prepare a high-quality batch, bringing along nearly half a sack to ensure a successful night of fishing. He was all set for a satisfying session, yet as he settled into his rhythm, we see him glancing nervously toward the reservoir entrance. He was so distracted that when a fish finally bit, his reaction was a second too slow, and he missed the strike entirely. Frustrated with himself, Wang Chong actually gave himself a light slap, cursing his own lack of focus at such a critical moment. After that brief moment of self-reproach, he forced himself to lock in, finally giving the water his undivided, professional attention. Meanwhile, after seeing to Wang Chong, Limu continued to welcome a steady stream of about a dozen more anglers to the site. By the time 8 o'clock rolled around, it seemed the arrivals had finally stopped. It was a crowded night, and the sun was just beginning to set. We see Limu quickly beginning his rounds, as the large crowd meant many more topmouth coulter and crucian carp needed to be registered. The workload was certainly increasing, but dinner was almost ready. He moved through the crowd, reminding some that it was time to eat. At the same time, he began registering those lucky anglers whose catches had already reached the weight requirements for the leaderboard. He was also quietly keeping an eye on the carp situation, though so far, not many people were actually catching them. The few that were caught were small, only a pound or 2, mostly because these anglers were actually targeting crucian carp. Because of this, their rods and lines were far too light. Whenever a truly large carp struck, the line snapped instantly. Before long, a frustrated angler ran over to ask Limu what was going on in the water while he tried for carp. He complained that his line kept snapping, wondering if there were other bottom dwellers. Another man added he'd lost 3 lines in 30 minutes. The man suspected carp and asked if there were giants in the reservoir, noting that Limu really should have mentioned them earlier. They had seen the crucian carp posts on WeChat and came specifically for them, leaving their heavy-duty gear at home. Limu simply smiled at their predicament, noting that he never actually said the reservoir only contained 2 types of fish. In a place like this, we find a bit of everything. Yes, there are crucian carp, but they aren't alone down there. He suggested they switch to heavier lines, and if they didn't have any, they could always buy some at his stall, though they should mind their rods. He warned that his crucian carp also come in giant sizes, and he didn't want them trading a snapped line for a broken rod. The current excitement over the crucian carp wasn't quite enough yet, even though the reservoir was practically teeming with them. Every species, from the small fry to the carp, was fighting for the bait, but to truly bring out the big carp, one needed a plan. The best way to target them was using tinder corn as bait, something the larger carp find quite irresistible. Using corn also helped avoid the smaller, pesky fish that usually swarmed the bait, ensuring that whatever bit was likely a prize. However, the anglers currently using corn were all fishing near the surface for topmouth coulter, which was a bit of a problem. It was essentially impossible to catch carp that way, as they are bottom dwellers, and the bigger they are, the deeper they stay. We see a large crowd gathered around a single fisherman, though from this distance, it's impossible to tell who is at the center. However, the sight of a fishing rod bent into a deep, straining arc above the crowd, and the whistling sound of the line, tells the story. The sound of the line cutting through the water is deafening, and we can hear the onlookers gasping in pure shock. Many are holding up their phones to record the spectacle. Realizing something big is happening, Li Mu quickly pushes through the crowd. To his surprise, it is Li Jian again, the lean man from before, who is now visibly struggling as he stands on the bank. His body is leaning back for leverage, arms locked tightly around the rod while the handle is braced firmly against his stomach. Li Mu approaches him in disbelief, asking if he wasn't supposed to be fishing for topmouth culture. This fish looks far heavier than 30 pounds. Li Jian is too focused to speak, holding his breath against the strain, but the surrounding crowd is more than happy to explain. They tell the boss that Li Jian switched to bottom fishing after hearing about the carp, and it didn't take long to get a bite. This was only his second cast on the bottom, and he hooked a monster. By the look of it, this fish weighs dozens of pounds. The crowd warns that there are clearly giants in this reservoir, and they fear Li Jian is about to lose the battle in a tug of war. Voices cry out for him to stay steady and get the rod tipped back up, the excitement of the onlookers reaching a fever pitch. We see Li Mu watching with wide eyes as Li Jian manages to stabilize his position for a brief, tense moment. But then, the beast in the water surges with a new burst of power, diving straight for the deepest part of the reservoir. Li Jian knows he needs to raise the rod to maintain the angle, but he also knows that forcing it now would be a disaster. He tries to control the tension by dropping into a low squat, but the creature below is proving to be a true force of nature. It feels like a literal water monster is on the other end, the entire rod pulsing and jerking violently with every movement. We can see the rod being pulled dangerously close to a straight line, accompanied by that sharp, whistling sound of the wind. The water continues to hiss. Normally, if one had a safety rope, this would be the moment to let go of the rod to save the line. Once the rod and line are pulled straight, the line is guaranteed to snap, and unfortunately, Li Jian doesn't have a safety rope. He tries to pump the rod to regain control, but it's useless. The tip is already halfway submerged in the water. Suddenly, Li Jian hugs the rod tightly to his chest and begins a desperate, rhythmic swaying motion from side to side. To be honest, what fisherman wouldn't feel their blood boil watching this? Even we can feel the adrenaline surging. This swaying technique is a classic move, the side-to-side sweep, often used to tire out a fish that refuses to budge. The principle is simple. When a fish dives for the deep and becomes uncontrollable, you must break its momentum. By shifting the direction of the pull, you force the fish to stop its straight-line charge. Usually, it comes down to this. When you employ this swaying method, there are only two outcomes. Either the fish is finally contained, or the line snaps instantly. We see Li Jian give it his all, but the rod tip continues to sink deeper until the entire first section is underwater. Just as the rod is fully submerged, a sharp bang echoes through the air. It's over, and Li Jian collapses onto the ground. He gasps for air, exhausted, while the surrounding crowd finally lets out the breath they had been holding in suspense. The onlookers sigh in disappointment. Though they admit his technique was excellent, anyone else would have lost that fish much sooner. It's a pity they never even got a glimpse of it. Everyone is left wondering just how massive that creature actually was. That final burst of power was simply unstoppable. Feeling a sense of relief himself, Li Mu steps forward to help Li Jian up. Li Mu comforts him, saying the fish would have escaped anyone, then asks how big he thinks it really was. Li Jian catches his breath and says if it's wild, it's at least 50 pounds, and if not, it's likely even larger. He admits he wasn't prepared, having switched to bottom fishing with his light topmouth coulter gear the moment he heard about the carp. That rod was only meant for general use, so it's no surprise it snapped. He vows to return with his heavy-duty gear next time. He plans to reinforce his lines and hooks, still breathing heavily as he recounts the battle to the gathered crowd. He warns that the carp in this reservoir are serious business and require heavy tackle. Then, someone asks Li Mu a question. The crowd wants to know exactly how large the biggest carp in these waters truly is. Li Mu simply smiles and thinks for a moment. Li Mu asks the crowd if they would believe him if he said there were carp in these waters weighing over 100 pounds. As soon as the words leave his mouth, the group bursts into laughter, telling the boss he must be exaggerating. They joke that even a fool wouldn't believe that, though some admit they have seen carp that size before. However, they've only seen them online and in other countries. They'll believe 50 or 60 pounds, but 100? They tell him 100 is just too much. Li Mu chats for a few more moments before continuing his rounds. By now, the sky is beginning to darken, and we see the first wave of fishermen already sitting down to eat. Li Mu soon arrives at the spot where the man they call Big Fat is stationed, who greets him with great excitement. He tells the boss he didn't know there were carp here, mentioning that someone just landed a 20-pounder. Li Mu simply smiles and tells Big Fat that 20 pounds isn't actually that large, leaving the man stunned. Big Fat asks how that isn't large, describing the fish's golden scales, red tail, and long, slender body. He notes its thick mouth, a clear sign of a wild fish. Li Mu gives him a small compliment for his observation. He remarks that while Big Fat's fishing skills might be questionable, he certainly knows how to identify a good fish. Meanwhile, we see Da Chengzi still busy helping Yang Yulan prepare dinner for the hungry crowd. Based on the current trend, it seems the carp are destined to be the stars of the show tonight. So far, the largest one successfully brought to shore is that 20-pounder Big Fat mentioned earlier. It's unlikely anything much larger will be caught tonight, as most of the fishermen weren't targeting carp. Their gear simply isn't ready for them, but that doesn't diminish the carp's power or the temptation they offer. We recall the row of fishermen who all had their lines snapped, and of course, Li Jian's recent struggle. Word of these battles will surely spread. Having finished his rounds, Li Mu finds he can no longer resist the urge. He begins to think about his own personal record for the largest fish he has ever caught in his career. His current record was a silver carp weighing just under 20 pounds, and a common one at that, not even a big head carp. To be perfectly honest, he had never truly experienced the sensation of battling a real monster of the deep. Just then, we see Bai Yunhai eating at his stall, so Li Mu walks over to ask how things are going. He asks if they should do it together late tonight, which, naturally, makes Bai Yunhai feel a bit uneasy. Looking up at Li Mu's serious and somewhat longing expression, Bai Yunhai feels a genuine sense of trepidation. He tells Li Mu to stay far away from him, prompting Li Mu to frown and snap back at his friend's reaction. He asks what on earth the boy is thinking. He was simply asking if they were going fishing together late tonight. He offered to set up an extra baiting spot in advance, a clarification that brings Bai Yunhai a wave of sudden realization. Relieved after the false alarm, Bai Yunhai agrees, though he admits he was hoping to catch some large topmouth coulter. Li Mu shakes his head, noting those are too small. He mentions the 100-pound carp and suggests they try for them. Bai Yunhai simply bursts out laughing, calling Li Mu a wicked old man for expecting him to believe such a tall tale. After chatting a bit more, Li Mu goes to find Yang Yulan and Brother Go, specifically to tell the latter he can head home. Once he finishes checking in with Yang Yulan, he makes a quick trip back to the village headquarters. He heads straight for the garden in front of Yang Yulan's house and begins picking fresh corn to use as bait. While one could certainly use old corn or fermented grain to lure carp, Li Mu has a different plan in mind. He intends to give the fish the very best tonight, fresh, tender corn straight from the stalk. Before long, he has gathered enough and stuffs it all into a burlap sack to carry back to the reservoir. He hauls the heavy load back to the rear mountain bay, just as the second wave of dinner is being served. Carrying the corn alone, he walks along the water until he finds a flat, secluded spot far from the other fishermen. He begins baiting the area early, knowing that for bottom feeders, an overnight baiting spot is always the best strategy. The carp density in the Yulong village reservoir is quite high right now, so baiting the area now for a late-night session is a solid plan. It should work perfectly, though there is a certain technique to it. Using only fresh, tender corn isn't quite enough on its own. He had also grabbed 2 bags of Laut and commercial corn from his car earlier, which he intended to mix in for the perfect blend. As we see him hunched over under the glow of his headlamp processing the corn, Da Kingzi suddenly runs over to find him. The young man explains he's there to deliver dinner, as Aunt Yulan noticed Li Mu hadn't eaten yet and asked for help. Da Kingzi holds out a disposable lunchbox, and Li Mu stands up with a smile, thanking him before suggesting he stay a while. He proposes that while he eats, Da Kingzi could help him prep the corn, a request that leaves the boy looking a bit confused. When asked what all this corn is for, Li Mu begins eating his meal and explains it's bait for the fishing spot. He mentions he'll be fishing here with Bai Yunhai late tonight, which immediately makes Da Kingzi's eyes light up as he asks to join. Li Mu shakes his head with a chuckle, noting that's impossible since the boy needs to be at the reservoir by 6 tomorrow morning. He needs someone to check in the other fishermen so he can actually fish, prompting a disappointed Da Kingzi to ask when Li Mu will arrive. Li Mu continues his dinner, casually mentioning that he plans to sleep in until noon the following day. He admits it's a relief to finally have someone to cover the shift, as he's only been sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night lately. He officially welcomes the boy to the Yulong Village Reservoir family, expressing his hope that he stays for the long haul. As an added employee perk, he tells him he can fish at the reservoir for free whenever he's off the clock. Hearing the words free fishing makes Da Kingzi beam with joy as he thanks his new boss, and the two continue chatting. Once the meal is finished, Li Mu returns to the corn while Da Kingzi prepares to head out for the evening. He tells the boy to head back with Yang Yulan once she's finished cleaning up, reminding him to be ready for work by 6. Da Kingzi agrees and leaves the fishing spot, and not long after he disappears, Li Mu finishes his preparations as well. He had sliced the kernels off the cobs and mixed them with the commercial grain, finally tossing half the mixture into the water. He set the other half aside to replenish the bait during the session, noting it was already past 9 o'clock. After finishing the prep, he went on another patrol, and by the time he completed the circuit, it was past 10. The first group of fishermen who had started earlier that afternoon were now beginning to return their catches. With the help of the anglers, he began processing the fish one by one, confirming his earlier suspicions about the night's haul. Tonight, the number of topmouth coulters and crucian carp reaching the leaderboard standards was relatively high. The carp being caught weren't particularly large, yet their sheer presence and allure remained undeniable to everyone present. Every fisherman there tonight saw the potential, and word would surely spread before the price increased tomorrow. He turned to Bai Yunhai and suggested they try their luck during the latter half of the night. If they managed to land a massive catch and film it, the price hike would be far more convincing to the public. Bai Yunhai nodded eagerly, his heart full of anticipation for their late-night fishing session, which was fast approaching. By 1 in the morning, the last of the anglers had finished returning their fish and were heading home. Now, only he and Bai Yunhai remained as the entire Hoshan Bay finally settled into a deep, quiet stillness. Of course, since tomorrow is Saturday, there were likely many people already sleeping in their cars nearby, waiting for dawn. At that moment, he turned to Bai Yunhai and asked how much gear and sundries he had managed to sell. Bai Yunhai checked his remaining stock and reported that almost everything had been sold out completely. He mentioned he would need to head to the county town early tomorrow to restock and bring back a larger load. Limu nodded in agreement, reminding him to bring back plenty of heavy-duty nets and specialized fishing supplies. He listed off the specific nets, fish guards, and high-speed rods that would likely be in high demand. After organizing the plan, he asked if they were still going to fish, and at the mere mention of it, Bai Yunhai perked up. Bai Yunhai's stance was firm. There was no way he was skipping the fishing after guarding the stall all night. He had even saved a dozen Red Bulls specifically for this moment, and seeing Bai Yunhai's unwavering determination, he knew there was no stopping him. And so, we see the two of them board the boat to clear the water's surface, removing broken lines and other debris left behind by the day's crowds. After quite a bit of effort, it was nearly 3 in the morning by the time they finished cleaning up. Bai Yunhai, ever the enthusiast, couldn't wait a second longer to grab his gear and set up near the spot where Li Mu had been baiting the water earlier that evening. Of course, he wasn't fishing in Li Mu's specific spot, nor had Li Mu helped him bait it, mostly because Bai Yunhai insisted on doing things his own way. He was still determined to catch topmouth coulters, while Li Mu headed home to retrieve a massive 8-meter-2 heavy-duty rod. He set up a heavy line group, specifically a 12+10, because his true target tonight was a legendary, oversized carp. To catch something of that scale, he needed a blunt fishing style, opting for size 10 and 12 hooks. Tonight was bound to be exciting. Even before the first cast, he felt a surge of adrenaline. Taking advantage of the quick trip home for his gear, he pulled out his phone for a moment. He wanted to check the day's earnings and see exactly how the situation stood. There had been 98 visitors this morning and 211 tonight, totaling 309 people for the day. When he did the math, the total fishing fees collected came to a staggering 185,300 yuan. After subtracting the 82,200 yuan paid out for returned fish, his net profit for the day was over 103,000 yuan. Deep down, he was thrilled to see his daily income surpass the 100,000 mark, realizing that substantial profits were now a daily reality. As for whether the earnings were fair, the numbers spoke for themselves. Out of today's 309 visitors, nearly 40 people had hit the jackpot, and many others had come close enough to at least break even on their fees. Altogether, about a third of the anglers walked away happy, a result he considered quite successful for everyone involved. Furthermore, the big fish leaderboard was growing. There were now 23 names on the Kulta list. The carp leaderboard had also grown to 11 people. With the day's accounts settled, he returned to the water with a sense of quiet anticipation. It was time to announce the price increase, and he decided that posting it to the WeChat group of nearly 500 members would be enough. Since the group was filled entirely with local fishing enthusiasts, he knew the news would naturally spread like wildfire through the community. And so, we see him send a simple message to the group. Good evening, everyone. I have an announcement to make. Starting this Saturday, the fishing fee will increase to 300 yuan per hour, with a minimum session of 5 hours. He added that the carp were biting now, and just like his other fish, they were plentiful, large, and some were even intimidatingly massive. He welcomed everyone to come and test their luck, noting the return price had risen to 5 yuan, even though it was nearly 3 in the morning. The moment he sent the message, it surprisingly stirred up quite a few night owls who were shocked by the sudden update. One user complained that he had planned to come for the carp tomorrow, only to find the boss had raised the prices right before his arrival. Another pointed out that 1,500 yuan for 5 hours was steep when the return price was only 5 yuan, a fair point, perhaps. Li Mu didn't dwell on the comments, knowing there was little to gain from arguing. He would simply wait to see who showed up Saturday morning. Of course, he hadn't forgotten the big fish leaderboard, so he sent another update regarding the Yulong Village reservoir rankings. He announced that carp were being added to the list, with a minimum entry requirement of 50 pounds or more per single fish. Needless to say, this news caused another explosion of messages in the group, but he no longer had the time to pay them any attention. The day had ended perfectly, and even though it was already 3 a.m. on a new day, he felt incredibly refreshed and satisfied. He quickly returned to the reservoir, reaching the spot he had baited earlier that evening, and began setting up his heavy gear. A night of passionate fishing was about to begin as he prepared the water, his focus entirely on the depths below. On one side, he watched for the carp. On the other, he kept his eyes peeled for any sign of movement in the dark water. He remained vigilant, his mind fixed on the legendary carp he knew were lurking just out of sight. The rhythm of the night took over as he waited patiently for the carp to take the bait, one cast at a time. As he focused on the carp, he turned to Bai Yunhai and asked which number angler this would be for the night. Bai Yunhai replied that the first angler had just finished, having missed one strike and losing another fish right after the hook set. Li Mu jokingly scolded Bai Yunhai for being such a letdown, but he quickly moved to help his friend out. He helped scoop up a largemouth fish weighing nearly 10 pounds before returning to his own spot to adjust his float. He felt a surge of excitement. He had baited this spot at 9 p.m., and several hours had passed since then. Using his heavy-duty line, he tested the tension to get a feel for the water before baiting both hooks with fresh corn. With high expectations, he cast his first line, though the 8-meter rod was as heavy as it was long. It was a rod he rarely used, and to be honest, his casting wasn't feeling particularly smooth just yet. Fortunately, the cast landed exactly where it needed to be, and after securing the rod, he went to grab 2 Red Bulls from Bai Yunhai. He left half a pack of cigarettes behind and returned to his seat. With a setup this heavy, he was waiting for a massive catch. In this scenario, he was essentially waiting for a firm strike, as small fish wouldn't even bother with bait this size. He decided to ignore the minor nibbles, telling himself to wait until the float fully submerged or drifted away. He even muttered a quiet plea to the universe, jokingly offering 30 years of Bai Yunhai's life for one legendary carp. All he wanted tonight was one truly massive fish, but Bai Yunhai overheard the mumbling and asked what he was talking about. Li Mu just chuckled and told him it was nothing, claiming he was simply commenting on how handsome his friend looked. Bai Yunhai clearly didn't buy that for a second, instead asking about the size of the line and hooks Li Mu was using. Li Mu confidently explained his heavy gear setup and his specialized rod, making his intentions for the night very clear. His goal was a carp weighing over 50 pounds, which prompted a skeptical laugh from Bai Yunhai at such a bold ambition. Bai Yunhai questioned if there were even fish that large in the water, but right then, the luminous float flickered red. His spirit surged with adrenaline, and he immediately gripped the rod with both hands, ready for the moment of truth. We see the float flash red twice in quick succession, yet there was no further movement, leaving him to wonder what was happening below. The line had only been in the water for a few minutes, so he told himself it was likely just a small fish bumping the wire. But just as he prepared to stand up and grab the safety rope from his tackle box, the float suddenly flashed red again. It dipped sharply, and we see his eyes light up as he realizes there is something significant on the other end. Li Mu gripped the heavy rod with both hands, forcing himself to wait a few more seconds before making his move. Suddenly, the float was dragged down with a powerful jerk, and he reacted with lightning-fast reflexes. He raised the rod, and the heavy, low hum of the line vibrating against the water filled the air. Nearby, Bai Yunhai had just thrown a scoop of bait when he heard the sound and looked over in complete shock. Stunned by the speed of the strike, Bai Yunhai watched as Li Mu struggled to control the fish and called out for help. He shouted that he hadn't tied the safety rope yet and needed Bai Yunhai to hurry over, as this fish felt massive. Bai Yunhai was equally excited, telling him to hold steady or let him take over, but Li Mu just needed a hand. He urged his friend to help him keep the rod upright, confident that his heavy-duty line could handle the strain. However, as he leaned back to gain leverage, the fish suddenly unhooked, sending him stumbling backward until Bai Yunhai caught him. Fortunately, he didn't hit the ground, but he took a deep breath, feeling the sting of a catch that vanished as quickly as it arrived. There were 2 main reasons for the loss. The first was that the bait had only been in the water for a few minutes. He simply hadn't expected such a large fish to be lurking right there on the bottom so soon. To be honest, he wasn't prepared for the sheer power of the strike from a rod he rarely used. This lack of mental preparation left him feeling a bit caught off guard by the sudden intensity of the fight. He found himself struggling to find his footing and couldn't get the rod into the proper position in time. In that crucial first second, he failed to center the rod against his body to distribute the weight. And so, the massive fish managed to pull itself free, leaving him with nothing but a heavy rod and a lingering sense of what might have been. He struggled to center the rod against his body, trying to find the leverage needed to control the frantic movement. It was a desperate battle of physics, with the rod tip dipping up and down as the weight shifted unpredictably. His goal was to keep the rod upright, and he called for Bai Yunhai to help him stabilize the heavy equipment. Now, most people would have stepped in from the side to help, but Bai Yunhai, that absolute rascal, decided to help from behind. The resulting tangle was awkward, to say the least, and Bai Yunhai sheepishly admitted he had simply panicked in the moment. He told Li Mu that since the fish was already gone, there was no point in blaming him, before quickly scurrying back to his own spot. Li Mu felt a bit dejected, but after taking a moment to compose himself, he finally pulled the line back in. He examined the line and saw it hadn't snapped. The fish had simply unhooked itself, though it had managed to bend the metal hook out of shape. With a heavy sigh, he estimated that the one that got away was at least 50 pounds, a truly unfortunate start to the day. And so, he cleared his mind, replaced the damaged hook with a new one, and cast his fresh corn bait back into the water.